Hello and welcome to the Real Life Podcast, episode number 38, and it's the third birthday of this podcast. Genuinely happy to still be doing these 3 years on. I have no desire to slow up, unfortunately, for you lot. Today, what we're doing is a brilliant bit of fun. Dr. Dan is back on the pod to impart his immeasurable wisdom and knowledge as we dive into all things Steven Spielberg. Dan told me that he's recently been on a Spielberg kick, and I've always got time for the great Spielberg, so we thought this could be a perfect topic to discuss. What we're going to do today is sort of twofold. We're going to talk through what Spielberg means to us, having grown up with him in two different eras, his filmography and the phases of his work, before essentially doing an Oscars for Spielberg. So the best score, best shot film, best performances, the best written film, his best directorial accomplishment, and his best film. This promises to be another comprehensive chat, but it should provide much entertainment for everyone listening. I hope you find this big time Spielberg deep dive as interesting as we do. I'll reappear at the end of this episode to give you a brief note about this pod's birthday and what it means to have people listen. But until then, sit back, relax, and enjoy this bumper episode of Dr. Dan Kenealy and I talking through all things Spielberg. So, Dan, you basically did most of the work for me. In terms of that email that you sent was just like, why don't we do all of this? I was reading it going, yep, yes, yep, absolutely, yep. So, as dictated, why don't we start with what Spielberg means?
As dictated, I don't like the sound of that. No.
Sorry.
I was having a really boring week, and this was my salvation this week, was randomly revisiting Steven Spielberg movies in my evenings, because there's been a lot of work, and it's the end of the semester, and I just needed something joyful. And then you popped into my head after I'd started watching the Spielberg movies, and I'd watched hundreds of Beavers as per your recommendation, so I thought, I need to get back to him about that and tell him that it's weird. So as dictated, go ahead.
Well, okay.
I didn't dictate it.
No, you didn't dictate it. It was purely suggestive. I was kind of struggling to remember what my first Spielberg memory actually was, in terms of like the first time I ever sat and observed or absorbed something Spielberg. I wondered if it was like maybe sort of the magic of Jurassic Park, or maybe the emotion of E.T. that was the first thing. And then I realised what it actually was getting shat up by the opening of Jaws. The opening sequence was on TV. I think we were on holiday somewhere. It was on a hotel, and I think, along with Finding Nemo, I think it's the birthplace of my thalassophobia, because it is so terrifying, that opening sequence. Still to this day, I think it's really scary. That was in the days where I wasn't remotely asked about who directed what, so it didn't bother me who it was, or what a director was, or that it was actually a film. So I've been able to appreciate Spielberg sort of later on. And he very much felt to me, when I was getting into films, like the king of movies. I've always had this notion of separation of films and movies, which is probably a really snobby and stupid idea. I don't know where it stems from, and I don't fully agree with it, but in my head, certain directors make movies and certain directors make films. So in my head, from my early experiences watching Jurassic Park, Indiana Jones, E.T., there were movies. Like, Ron Howard is a movie director, Rob Zemeckis is a movie director. But Spielberg felt like the king of that, capturing that in his absolute essence. So, and what I think that's down to is the spectacle of Steven Spielberg films is something to be admired most of the time. The scale of them, it's perfect. So, like, being able to see a dinosaur for real, which still holds up to this day when it's waiting so long. Yeah, I mean, that's what it felt like, though, I mean,
it did, really, absolutely.
I love that stuff. And then as you grow older, you realise the reason you come to appreciate that kind of stuff is because it's built in with all this emotion around it, which I think emotion is what Spielberg does better than anybody else. I think he's the king of making us care about the people that we're watching. And that's sort of what Spielberg meant to me, and still kind of does now. But I will have had a very different experience to being introduced to him than you did, I would have thought.
Yeah, I mean, my dad seems apt to start a podcast about Spielberg by talking about your dad, who I have no functioning relationship with anymore. But the biggest effect that he had on my life, certainly, was he was the person who introduced me to cinema at a very, very young age, possibly too young in some cases. We might touch on that. When I was 4 or 5, I was watching Star Wars movies, and then a sort of natural connection point, I guess, to that became Indiana Jones. Clearly, as a kid, you just sit them down, and they like a big action adventure, and so Indiana Jones or Raiders of the Lost Ark was one of the first movies that I saw at home, and then my first movie on the big screen, and I didn't even really know what it was. I didn't know what we were doing. We went to this old sort of theatre in Liverpool. We went in, we got the popcorn, I sat in this chair. It was back in the day where you'd have, red velvet curtains over the screen. So I had a kind of sneaking suspicion about what was going on. This was going to be a big television behind the screen. And it was a big television behind the screen. And it was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. That was my first movie on the big screen, which is a pretty good first movie to see on the cinema. And then it just kind of rolled from there. My dad would take me to the movies every week, every couple of weeks at least. And then at home, because these things weren't being re-released, it was E.T., it was Jaws. And so Spielberg was the first person I understood as a film director, which sounds like a weird thing to say as a sort of 6 or 7 year old. And it's not as if I was walking around giving speeches to everybody about Steven Spielberg, the great auteur, but I was aware of who he was in the same way that you would know an actor or what, it's like a Spielberg movie. So that was my first sort of introduction to him. And then, you just sort of end up growing up with him. From those more, action adventure kind of movies, it just the next logical step, I think, from my dad's perspective was, well, let's introduce you to some more grown-up films. And one of the first ones was Empire of the Sun, which I think I saw at home when I was maybe around 9 or 10, which bothered me a lot.
Yeah.
The idea of seeing all of this, the sort of trauma of war and the displacement and the internment, but very much through the perspective of a child. So even bombing raids on the internment camp towards the end are made to look and feel exciting because that's probably how a kid would see it to some extent. And then the big misstep, I think, of my dad's decision-making around this stuff was to let me watch Schindler's List around about the same time when I was maybe 10. Yeah, it would have been sort of 9 or 10. And that was the first movie that ever gave me deep, profound, recurring nightmares for understandable reasons, in a way that The Terminator never did, in a way that, horror movies never really have. But Schindler's List really, really bothered me. At that age, it was probably too young. And it was just another very brief. It's one of the, because of obviously the presence of Nazis as villains, slightly sort of comical villains in the Indiana Jones movies.
Yeah.
I understood the Nazis as characters in films before I understood the Nazis as figures from history, which created some interest in artwork when I was literally in primary school, because I would sort of draw pictures and stuff, and I had no idea what the sort of social political connotations of a swastika was. To me, it was just the same as the Empire in Star Wars. These are the bad guys chasing Indiana Jones. So much so that it actually led to a conversation between my parents and my teacher about my use of Nazi imagery in my artwork when I was 5 or 6. Schindler's List knocked that on the head. I've never incorporated swastikas into my artwork since. So this is just getting me almost to age 10. I should shut up now. I'm rambling. But,
well, as long as you drew them as the baddies, then I suppose everything was all right. Your son has displayed incredibly anti-fascistic tendencies in his nursery work. That's great. The Schindler's List thing's weird because normally what Spielberg's so good is wrapping up the big scale he does. It's not, Jurassic Park isn't about dinosaurs. Obviously it is about dinosaurs, but it's about a man getting ready to become a father, and the absolute crux of Jurassic Park is the Sam Neill storyline, who he hates kids, and by the end of this disaster movie, he likes kids, and now he's ready to be a dad.
I thought the main story of Jurassic Park was how Ian Malcolm is like just the hottest character ever in the history of film, just the most purely sexual being ever put on film. But I guess you can take your perspective on it. Probably aligns more with Spielberg's life work, sure.
Probably. But that's also why I hate the Jurassic World films, because they've just completely missed the point. It's not about someone getting ready to become a dad. It's about Blue the dinosaur, and that really gets on my nerves. But yeah, I mean, outside of the first sequence of Jaws, it's not about a shark. It's a thriller about the characters and all that. So, but what we also want to talk about was these sort of the eras of Spielberg. So, obviously, at the beginning, you've got the TV breakthrough with Jewel, which I haven't actually seen.
Oh, you got
but I
put it on.
okay.
Put it really high on the list.
Right.
It's maybe we'll mention it a bit more, but it's just such a tight movie. There's 2 versions of it. There's a TV movie version, the original version, which I think is about 75 minutes.
Okay.
And then they added 14 or 15 minutes to give it a theatrical run, initially in Europe, I think, which does kind of slightly bloat it out a bit. They add some voiceovers and some longer shots of the guy driving through the... but all all of the sort of those Spielberg tools and those Spielberg moves that you see in Jaws, they're kind of right there in Duel. The sort of camera movement, the Spielberg wanna, they're all there in Duel. They're just incredible. And yeah, it's definitely worth a watch. But
right,
yeah.
okay. And I also haven't seen Sugarland Express, which it doesn't pop up often in sort of, the lists of best and greatest things, but what it does obviously do is then culminates with Jaws and this kind of, he births the summer blockbuster, basically. It wasn't just like it was a monster movie. It proved that, if you go with smart pacing, strong character hooks, and, a lean shooting schedule, I mean, everyone knows all of the ridiculousness about how Jaws was made and how the shark was the worst actor ever and all this sort of stuff. We, literally are going to need a bigger boat. The wreckage of the orca is still there, all this kind of stuff. But even, at those early stages, you see these sort of recurring themes of ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, and also then the timing of when he releases these things has a huge impact, and now we get the summer blockbuster in kind of the way we know it. And there is a love of sort of Americana, willingness to play on childhood fears and centrism on that, but I think you can absolutely see all of the birth of Spielberg.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, by the time you get to the mid-70s, I mean, Sugarland Express is see everything that Spielberg's ever made, I guess, is the sort of bottom line, isn't it? But see Duel before you see Sugarland Express. Sugarland Express is a really interesting film. A lot of it just takes place in a car. And again, some incredible camera movements and some incredible shots where you see some of that Spielberg magic. But it's very much, it's Spielberg trying to do something which is a bit new Hollywood. But, it comes out a year after Badlands, which is a similar sort of two people on the run from the law kind of thing. And you just see all the style in Sugarland Express, but none of the depth, none of the message, none of the sort of, all of the things you'd see in the sort of Terrence Malick when he's doing this. And it's not that it's a bad film, it's not. It's just, it feels like Spielberg trying to work in a new Hollywood space that he then basically explodes with Jaws, because there is no one movie that brings the new Hollywood era to an end. But Jaws, Star Wars, Spielberg and Lucas basically kind of did it and ushered in the blockbuster era and the return of the studios. So they're an interesting double sort of 74 Sugarland Express, 75 Jaws, because you have this Spielberg just sort of reaching into a type of filmmaking that was sort of characterizing Hollywood for the previous 7-8 years, and then the next year just coming out and blowing that up.
I mean, I've sort of, and then building on that, the second phase that I've got is this kind of fantastic realist phase. So Close Encounters, Raiders Lost Ark, E.T., I think also 1941.
You skipped The Disaster, sorry. Which is 1941.
I didn't want to mention it.
Well, have you seen that one?
I have.
Okay, because that is one that when we get to best performances in a Spielberg film, best cinematography in a Spielberg film, 1941, spoiler alert, not coming up anywhere on my list. I did rewatch it this week, and I did laugh at the opening sequence, because it kind of opens with this, he's drinking his own Kool-Aid, and he's like, I'm going to open this like Jaws. And I don't know if you remember, because I don't know how long ago you saw it, and then the woman's sort of in distress in the sea off the coast of, off the coast of California, she's swimming, and he even uses the music, da-dum, da-dum, and you're like, oh my god, is this Jaws too? And then this Japanese submarine comes up out the water beneath her, because that's the sort of the movie is, and she's sort of clinging to the mast of this submarine. And I did laugh. But then I did not laugh again for the next 2 hours of the movie.
The first laugh doesn't justify the following.
No. Great score, though. I mean, it's John Williams, but even that's the thing. Even in bad Spielberg movies, and he has made some bad films, there's always something.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't know when to touch on it, but I suppose now's as good a time as any. How much do you think that Spielberg films are Spielberg films because of John Williams? Because I think I've spoken about this a lot, but and Edgar Wright's talked about it, but it's this idea of scores that you can sing, and what's the last great score that you can sing? It'll be a John Williams and a Spielberg thing, or it'll be John Williams and Harry Potter or something like that. And so many melodic pieces that John Williams has done for Spielberg. If you think of the film, you probably think of the music before you think of anything else. So he's clearly had an enormous impact.
Absolutely. You think about now, and even sort of who's the Spielberg of today? Is it Denis Villeneuve? Maybe. Is it Christopher Nolan? Maybe. But you don't really hum. Well, you might hum Dune soundtracks actually.
Well, yeah, but I'm slightly weird, so.
But you don't hum Oppenheimer.
No,
I don't.
That's because people would section you in the street because
exactly.
it doesn't sound like anything.
Well, you said last time we talked, you said you hum sometimes just the Schindler's List tune, which I found strange. Anyway, but no, I think you've hit the nail absolutely on the head. And watching some of these movies again this week, I noticed. I'm certainly not the first person to notice this. On one level, what I'm about to say is totally banal, but I'll say it anyway. There are just incredibly long sequences in Spielberg movies where there's not a lot of dialogue at all. So this week when I was rewatching E.T., which I haven't seen for years from start to finish, I've never actually sat down and watched it for, it must be a good more than 10 years. And the last sort of half an hour, again, spoiler alert, it came out in 1982, so people, come on. The last half hour from when sort of E.T. comes back to life and they sort of abscond with him to get him back to his ship. I really have just ruined the movie now, haven't I? There's hardly any dialogue.
Yeah.
It's the bikes, it's the chase, it's the liftoff and the flying, through the air, and it's John Williams music all the way to the end of the final shot. Fine. E.T. says, "I'll be right here," and then it's just that rousing final John Williams score, and the spaceship goes off into the sky, and it just closes on a classic Spielberg close-up shot of often a child's face just emoting. Yep. John Williams music in the background. There's no dialogue.
No.
So the music is tremendously important for that, amongst other things, I think, for that reason.
Well, I kind of think this is why this particular era is where he sort of finds his magic formula, in a sense. The blockbuster spectacle with human protagonists and then the childlike curiosity. I think one thing to note at the very early outset of Spielberg is this is someone who clearly didn't ever get over the separation of his parents and what that did to him, because it feeds into so many of his films. It's why some of them are so child-centric, and E.T. in particular obviously takes that exact perspective. And the emotions of it means that, as sad as that is for him, it's kind of like gets brilliant emotion out of all of these films, and they come from sort of a heartfelt place, and that works really, really well. And these become like essentially cultural touchstones, really. And they sort of cement Spielberg in the public eye as the director of kind of cinematic joy, until the next phase when he becomes serious auteur historical Spielberg.
Yeah, well, so we've got Temple of Doom, I guess, is 84. So that's in with the. And then sorry, you were about to go ahead.
You get Colour Purple, you get Empire of Sun, you get Schindler's List, and then Jurassic Park in the same year. And it's a maturing voice, it's a growing up, it's kind of deliberately tackling weightier subjects. Colour Purple is an interesting one because it's really, really dialed down from the book, despite, it dealing with race and gender. It's still not the sort of the hard look at it that the book actually is. You've got childhood trauma in Empire of the Sun, obviously the Holocaust, and then critics start to see Spielberg back, I think, not just as like a technician of thrills, but sort of also capable of moral and emotional depth at the same time, and that's quite a big turn. Am I right in thinking that he submitted Schindler's List as the final part of his film course? I think that's the story. I think he submitted Schindler's List as his he was doing some random filmmaking course on the side, and he submitted that as his final project. Can you imagine being another student in that class and going, well, that's not fair. I've made a shot about a man walking through a tunnel, and you've made Schindler's List. Like that, there's levels to this game.
Was he taking? I mean, I don't know the story.
I think he was
taking classes or something.
Yeah,
because he famously, as a kid, I guess as a teenager, he didn't get into USC films. Like he wanted to go to film school, and for whatever reason, he didn't. I think he didn't have the grades, and there was an academic component to it as well. And of course, then the no one's quite sure where the truth ends and the myth begins with Spielberg, because he's been quite good at telling these stories of how he sort of snuck onto the studio lot and set himself up in an office, and then would hang out on Hitchcock sets until he got noticed and they'd tell him to go away, and eventually was taken under the wing of one of the studio execs who gave him a contract to direct television initially. And one of his first directorial jobs was directing an episode of a TV show that the name is escaping me, but the first actor that he had to work with professionally was Joan Crawford. which I assume is quite at 20 you're going to learn a lot from directing Joan Crawford.
Yeah.
But so this idea that maybe he did go back and try and try and complete some sort of film school course, it wouldn't surprise me, because he strikes me, not that I've ever met him, but as someone who's had a lot of baggage, chips on the shoulder that he's wanted to. He sought recognition so much from Hollywood, and that's where we get to this important stage of his career. You know, I'm going to adapt The Color Purple. I'm going to adapt a J.G. Ballard novel. I'm going to do Empire of the Sun. I'm going to, you know, and it was criticized at the time by a lot of critics. This is just a desperate play for Oscars. It kind of burned him that he, you know, Raiders was nominated for Best Picture and Best Director, lost. Chariots of Fire that year. E.T. lost to Gandhi. I mean, so you can understand how Spielberg he wanted the Oscar. He's never made any bones about this. I mean, when he won his second Oscar for Saving Private Ryan, you know, standing ovation is spontaneous. He gets up on the stage and the first thing he says is, "Am I allowed to say that I really wanted this?" And I was like, yeah, that's great. I'm glad that you said that. But he wanted it earlier. There's this great clip. Sorry, I'm rambling. But there's a great clip on YouTube of him watching the 1975 Academy Award Oscar nominations, which was the year Jaws was eligible. And Jaws was nominated for Best Picture. And he must have told his friends, film me watching this, because it didn't happen by accident. And he didn't get nominated for Best Director for Jaws. And his reaction is kind of, you know, he just can't understand it. And then he starts ranting about, you see, this is the thing, they want you to be successful, but they don't want you to be too successful. And I think the issue that some people had with him in the second half of the 80s is this guy is slowly becoming the king of a certain type of cinema. A lot of the critics didn't like that because they saw it as the end of that new Hollywood period, that gritty 70s kind of cinema. You and George Lucas and Bob Zemeckis now, you're killing it, and we want it back. So the critics were a bit reluctant to sort of endorse The Color Purple and Empire of the Sun and so on. And I think a lot of other people in Hollywood who weren't critics were like, well, hang on a minute. You rule at the box office and now you're going to rule at the Oscars too. No. Wait.
Yeah.
Now, there are also deep problems with Color Purple and Empire of the Sun, which is maybe why they didn't get him his Oscars and he had to wait. And maybe we can briefly, touch on them. I did rewatch The Color Purple this week. Yeah, I mean, it's just such a sanitized, Disneyfied sort of version of that story. If you're going to do it like that, just do it like the musical a couple of years ago, because they have a weirdly similar tone and color palette, and I'm like, this is strange. And there's a montage towards the end of Spielberg's Color Purple where Celia is reading the letters that she's found from Nettie, and it's so she's saying she's in Africa, and Whoopi Goldberg's character sort of imagines what Africa might be like, and it's all set to, in this case, Quincy Jones did the music, and it's really, really uncomfortable to watch. It just doesn't work. It
doesn't feel
at
right.
all.
No.
And then all the lesbianism's dialed down. And I don't think Spielberg's the person you go to for a heavy lesbian love plot. No, I
very much didn't feel like that. Then actually, just this is from the Wikipedia. In 2002, Steven Spielberg submitted his film Schindler's List to fulfill the student film requirement for his Bachelor of Arts degree in Film and Electronic Arts at California State University, Long Beach. He originally started the degree in 1969, but not finished it, and so by submitting Schindler's List, he was able to complete the requirements for his degree. I mean, that's badass. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. It probably meant as much to him as the Oscars did.
Yeah.
Because he does seem to be someone who... Well, he just steeped in the history of these classic filmmakers, the John Fords, the William Wylers, and so on, and he sees that recognition, whether it's having the formal qualification and getting through film school, or whether it's having 3 Best Director Oscars, which he's desperately been on the hunt for that 3rd Best Director Oscar for about 20 odd years now, and I don't think he's ever going to get it, unfortunately.
It doesn't feel like that, but I suppose, and then so the phase afterwards is sort of, I don't want to say the commercial peak, really. It feels almost like the Steven Spielberg franchise begins.
Yes.
Amistad, which I haven't seen, but then you get Saving Private Ryan, you get AI, you get Minority Report, you get War of the Worlds, and then less said about King of the Crystal Skull, the better. But that balance between art and commerce is something that he sort of He oscillates between the prestige pictures and then the tentpole spectacles like Jurassic Park sequels and Crystal Skull. But in there you've got Saving Private Ryan and Munich and things like that. And he's a tech pioneer in this instance as well, because the digital effects, like in AI and Minority Report, I mean, all the stuff with AI, the way it was made is really interesting. Like the fact that it was for ages, it was a Kubrick film, but as we know, Kubrick likes to take his time shooting, and the problem literally was this child will grow up in the time that we have. I can't remember who he went to. He said, "I need you to make a robot boy," and they were like, "We can't do that. That's not going to happen." Mm-hmm. So he eventually, when he realised that sort of all the stuff with the mother and all this kind of thing, he was like, "Stephen, this is a you film. This isn't a me film," and handed it over. And actually, what I think comes out of it is really, really strong. And then Tintin is just after this era as well. But so advancing the motion capture thing as well is a huge part of Spielberg's era. And again, this is an era of divided opinions because loads of people laud his ambition. So then some critics argue that his mid-2000s work was just spectacle and no depth whatsoever. And some of that, Kingdom of the Crystal, it is awful. It is absolutely... I rewatched it the other day and it is absolutely shockingly bad.
I think it's his worst.
Yeah.
I'd rather watch 1941.
Yeah. Shia LaBeouf reminding us what a wonderful actor he is. But again, what's frustrating with that era is that, like, there are great films buried within that, I think.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of Minority Report. I think it's really kind of overlooked. I think I love the way it looks and the pacing of it's really good fun. It's just kind of, it wore it on its sleeve and then it set out to be this kind of, I mean, I know this is the whole like zoom and enhance, like every technological cliche in any film ever is in Minority Report, like stop, zoom, enhance, expand this, all this sort of stuff, someone typing randomly at a keyboard. But it's kind of the archetype for that, and I do admire it for that. Mm-hmm. But it's an interesting era, this one. It
is an interesting era. I mean, there's a lot in that, what you've just said, and I agree with most of everything that I think you're saying. But yeah, 93 to me is the something changes. Mm-hmm. You know, he really, Jurassic Park and Schindler's List in the same year.
Which is nuts.
Filming Schindler's List by day and trying to do editing and post-production on Jurassic Park by night. A lot of which he actually entrusted to George Lucas to do. And then he tries the same trick 4 years later. Amistad, his weighty, serious movie, The Schindler's List of 1997, The Lost World, the direct sequel to Jurassic Park, and it doesn't, they're pale imitations of the 93 movies. Amistad definitely is a movie that I think, I didn't get to that this week, but I think you could put that in, like, I think Spielberg said this himself, he has this little run of movies from Amistad would be the first, all the way up to The Post. And I think he's described it as his rule of law movies. It's like basically these are movies about how everybody has rights, whether they're people brought to America, or everybody should have rights, whether they're people brought to America illegally, or whether in Bridge of Spies there's somebody from the enemy is here spying on us, but they still have rights. And you get all these sort of long constitutional discussions. Amistad, Lincoln, Bridge of Spies, The Post, you could sort of put those four movies together as thematically sort of trying to grapple with the same thing. Because he is, I mean, he's an optimist, he's a bit of an idealist, I think, Steven Spielberg. You see when he makes any kind of movie that touches on American history, there is an idealism and a lack of grit to it, I think. And then, yes, you're right, you go, so I would take the sort of Saving Private Ryan, then we move on, as you just said, AI, I would draw a break at 2005.
Okay.
Because I think something shifts again in 2005. And I think if you take the most interesting run of his cinema to me is AI, artificial intelligence in 2001, to Munich. And you've got AI, Minority Report and Catch Me If You Can in the same year. He does that again, both with the two biggest stars at that point, Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks Cruise, in one film, Tom Cruise in the other film. Then he does The Terminal, which is a sort of bit of an interesting failure, I guess.
Yep.
War of the Worlds and Munich. And this is this almost mini post 9/11 phase. And I think, again, possibly because of that idealism and optimism and faith in America that he has. I mean, he's described himself as quite patriotic and quite idealistic and so on. And I think what happens in the early 2000s really, you see that post 9/11 aesthetic coming out through these movies. I mean, War of the Worlds literally looks like footage from 9/11, people covered in dust and and running through the streets of an American town, of an American city. Munich closes literally with a shot of the Twin Towers. It's the final shot of the movie. The terminal is fundamentally about people being displaced in a world at war, falling apart, and borders not meaning what they mean anymore. And Minority Report is, it's been described by some film and politics scholars as the movie you used to teach the Bush-Cheney doctrine of sort of preemptive intervention. So this run of films, kind of from AI through to Munich, are, to me, some of his deepest, most fascinating work, where he's bringing those two things together. These are bangers that you can just watch and not really look at that critically if you don't want to. But if you want to really get into them, you can. And people have written essays and people have written, sort of books about this period. And then we get to the Crystal Skull, and it just all, to me, it goes off the rails. And I think from there, almost until his last couple of movies, I find it such a disappointing era. You either get these bloated, stately rule of law dramas, Lincoln, Bridge of Spies, The Post, none of which I particularly enjoy. Okay. Bridge of Spies, I think, is best. Or you get this, he's a kid again experimenting with CGI and performance capture, and give me a 20-minute highlight reel of Tintin, but don't make me watch the whole thing.
Yeah.
And Warhorse, just no. I think the problem with Warhorse is I'd seen it on stage.
Yes.
And then I was like, why have you done this?
Didn't need this.
I got booed in the cinema watching Warhorse.
Got booed?
I was so fed up by the end of this movie. I was so bored that when they're all standing anguishing over the horse and the injuries, I literally said out loud, because I was so fed up, oh, just shoot the damn thing. I was booed in the cinema. I was watching it with my friend Mark, and he literally slapped me on the arm. He said, shut up. And I was like, this is boring. This is real. So I'm not, this is a disappointing era to me.
Yeah. Well, I suppose...
Hey, at least I wasn't drawing Nazi imagery.
No.
I was just saying shoot a horse,
it begs that, just before we touch on this last era, because it finishes with something that I really want to talk about, it begs the question, did Spielberg lose something by moving into the big budget spectacle in the 2000s, or was he simply adapting to kind of the box office of the time? Because part of the big thing I have with Spielberg is that he's kept himself as completely bankable the whole time. It's very, very rare that he will, despite what critics say, it's very rare that he'll have a box office drop because his name's carried so much weight. And I wonder if part of that is because he has dipped back into Indiana Jones and Jurassic Park sequels, which I don't think he should have made any Jurassic Park sequels, but part of me thinks that as much as I don't like some of those big, purely spectacle films, were they kind of necessary in order to keep him being able to do the other stuff? In the sense that studios know that if Spielberg's behind it, you're most likely going to make your money back and then some more.
Yeah, I think there is... Yeah, I think there is something to that. I mean, the man certainly doesn't need... he certainly doesn't need cash. He's still getting money from He did a great deal with Universal when they started making, using all of his rides as big... using his films, as big theme park draws, which is another big part of Spielberg, as in my youth, was those first trips to sort of Orlando and get the Indiana Jones stunt show at Disney, and you get Jaws, and you get Jurassic Park, and you get E.T. at Universal Studios. But he still gets, I think, a cut, basically every year of this stuff. And he did a famous trade for part of the rights for Star Wars with George Lucas back in '77. Spielberg was doing Close Encounters, Lucas was doing Star Wars, and they both thought each other's films were going to be really big successes, but thought their own films were going to bomb. Yeah. And so as a bet, they kind of traded 5%. And Lucas still did got something out of that with Close Encounters, but net. Big loss for 5% of Star Wars. Yeah. So and then E.T. became the biggest box office film ever, and then Jurassic Park became the biggest box office film ever. And that's before you get into all of the other movies that Spielberg has produced. Executive produced, and therefore, I think he truly likes to. And you've already touched on this, and I think you're right, he's got a fascination with the technology. I mean, he's always been trying to push the boundaries of what you can do, what you can film, what you can make. When he sat down to do Jurassic Park, apparently he went to his producers and said, go and find this go and find me dinosaurs. You need to make me dinosaurs, and they need to be able to run. And his producer said, after consulting with the visual effects teams, it's like, that's not possible. We can build you a dinosaur, but it's just going to stand there and move its head. And he's like, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
It has to run. And then, we get, Jurassic Park really drove forward some of the birth of computer-generated effects, which was being worked on in parallel, and then Spielberg picked it up and used it there. So he's always got this fascination with that kind of stuff. So he's never, I don't think, going to be someone who just makes the post again and again and again.
Yeah.
But I think what happened with it happens with a lot of filmmakers, when they get into their 60s and 70s, that I don't want to say they lose their edge. That's too simple, but there doesn't seem to be the same urgency or depth of like when he does these sort of more serious drama films, something maybe he's not picking the right materials. I mean, Schindler's List obviously is deeply personal story to him as a Jewish man, but there's just something about the post Bridge of Spies where I'm just wondering how much he's invested in the stories.
Well,
and they just feel very 7 out of 10 movies, and they trundle along and they're fine, and then they're over, and then you forget about them. They don't leave a lasting impact.
I think there's less risk to take once you get into that particular era of the filmmaking. Is it like he's proven everything he needs to prove at this point? Yes, he's hoping for that third Oscar, but I think even he knows that he's not going to find it making the films that he's been making.
I think he thought he might have gotten one for the Fabelmans until that abomination of an Oscar year took its turn, and we ended up. Well, I'm not talking about that.
No.
I'm not going to mention that film.
On the topic of building dinosaurs, have you heard the story around Carnosaur?
I don't think so. So what is Carnosaur?
Carnosaur, it was started off as a John Brosnan novel, but it came to the attention of Roger Corman, right? And he asked Adam Simon to direct it. And I heard Mark Como talk about this, is the only reason I know it. And Adam Simon was talking to his wife, and they said, they want to make me do this dinosaur movie. I really don't want to do it. And he's trying to be this sort of auteur kind of, art house director. And his wife says, you have to do it. And he says, why? Because otherwise you'll make up making Carnosaur 2. That's the way it's going to go. And they give him an $850,000 budget. And he says, you can't make a dinosaur movie for that amount of money. And Roger Corman says, no, you have to do it. It's got to have an exploding helicopter, and you've got to have a dinosaur in it, and that's what's going to happen. And you don't have more than $1 million. So anyway, Adam Simon goes away and he makes Carnosaur, and then he shows it to Roger Corman, and there's no dinosaur in it. And then the whole film plays out, and Roger Corman goes, where's the fucking dinosaur? And he goes, exactly, now pay for the dinosaur. So you have to have a proper kind of can-do, let's make every single ounce of this budget go onto the screen with something like Jurassic Park, because otherwise you will end up making Carnosaur and it will fall flat on its arse. There is a Carnosaur 2, but I don't think Adam Simon directed it.
And he obviously had the clout to do that in 93. I mean, the interest in parallel to that is Jaws, where the shark didn't work very well. And he had to come up with a way. Well, he had to come up with a solution, and the solution was genius, which is don't show the shark that much. It's what you don't see is scarier than what you see. And the other genius solution in Jaws was, well, what can I create? I need two things. I need something visual on the eye, and I need something aural on the ear that creates the fear of the shark, even when we can't see the shark. And he comes up, well, obviously John Williams comes up with the just the 2-note score, and you're going to know where the shark is as soon as you hear dun, dun, dun. And the other thing is the barrels, is the the barrels that they use to, because then you don't need to see the shark. You know when it's coming because you see these barrels skating across the water, and that's a level of creativity that you maybe have to reach for more when you're on a tight budget with your second film, filming out on the water at Martha's Vineyard, as opposed to the biggest guy in Hollywood with kind of all the money in the world.
Okay, well, on this final era then.
Yes. Are you going to mention Ready Player One? I'm wondering what you're going for here, because I didn't mention.
I would include that in this era, but I don't know what to call it. It feels slightly like a more personal, slightly reflective era, but within that is so much kind of fanfare that I don't really know if that is actually the case. So obviously you've got historical punctuations with Bridge of Spies and Lincoln and The Post, and then obviously The Fabelmans is the most personal thing he'll ever make, or ever could hope to, or anyone could ever hope to make. And yes, he sort of really gets to grips with technical mastery, I think, in this era. and some of the emotion is much more subtle than it was before. I think when people, it really ground my gears when people said that they got bored by Bridge of Spies, because I thought, this is a world of secrecy and espionage, and the emotion is dialed right down, but it's still absolutely there. And I think that's why, on retrospect, I'm not that mad about Mark Rylance winning an Oscar for that, because it is this kind of really dialed down, stripped back, calm performance, which I think fits the film absolutely perfectly. There was a couple of other good nominations that year, but still, I just, and yet, so from 2011, you've got Tintin, which, like you said perfectly, show me the 20-minute montage, don't show me the whole film. Warhorse is a disaster. Lincoln is all about the performances. It's not really about the filmmaking for me in that instance. Bridge of Spies I actually really quite liked. BFG, again, it's this kind of, yes, it's technical and trying to push that, but it's fine. The Post is sweet, but that's kind of it. And then Ready Player One, it was like, I just didn't get on. I never really got on the train with it. I think it's partly because I'd read the book and I was like, this is brilliant. And then it's this kind of slightly ugly adaptation where he sort of does what I've loved so much about Spielberg for the whole time is the use of the practical, and it almost does completely away with that and just flies into the mechanics of computers, which I get for the story, but also just it doesn't feel like a Spielberg film. It really doesn't feel like this was his project. It feels like that. So it's the last in that horrible computerized trilogy of Tintin, BFG, and then this, and then it just fell completely flat for me. I really didn't get on board with it. West Side Story, it was a completely different scenario, because I was just so I just thought it was great. It felt like a return back to the very early days of Spielberg, where it was all just about the evocation of place and the framing being used, that very kind of let's give you a sense of where we are scale wise Spielberg framing and moving with people and all sort of stuff. I absolutely loved it. It's an interesting time.
I think to me, and maybe it's just nostalgia on my part, because I grew up with the T's and the Raiders and the wherever and so. But if I think about the sort of the BFG kind of Tintin kind of thing, I think there's a big difference between Spielberg movies that center kids and Spielberg movies that are kind of made for kids.
Yeah.
And when he does the latter, to me it doesn't work. Like E.T. centers a kid and you can show it to kids, but it's not a movie made principally or exclusively to try and corner the kids market for children.
Yeah.
It's, what do they call it? A 4-quadrant movie. That's what they all call it, right? It appeals to everybody. If you don't like E.T., I'm going to have problems with you as a human. But when he actually tries to make movies that are for children, Hook, I don't know many grown-ups who enjoy Hook particularly. Yeah. Tintin, BFG, I don't really think they work. Ready Player One, I can't say that much about it because I saw it once. I'm not as steeped in I know there's a whole sort of world around that, and the people have read the book and so on. I saw it once and I thought it was kind of overwhelming and a bit of a mess, but there were bits of it where I was like, oh, this is quite cool. I mean, The Shining bit on there. I mean, there's bits of it where you're just like, this is really good. Yeah. But I don't have that much, to say about it. West Side Story, on the other hand, yes, he's back. Yeah. The last two movies that he's made have been in my top 5 of the respective years. West Side Story, I think probably would have been I would have given my best film prize in 2021 to West Side. Yeah. So you would have given it to Dune, I know, but
probably, well, maybe, but yeah.
And if I was around wanky people, I would give it to Drive My Car, but I wouldn't actually give it to Drive My Car. I'd give it to West Side Story. That was one of the first times for a while at that point, partially I guess because of COVID, but where I went to the cinema and the second it finished, I turned to, I saw it with my partner Jan, and I just said, I'm coming back to see that tomorrow. And I went back to see it the next day. Right. And that's very unusual. I did that with Maverick as well. So just so people understand the level of cinematic brilliance that will get me to the cinema on 2 consecutive days. But no, I mean, I thought it was to sort of to remake one of the landmark musicals of the past 60 years, a movie that won 10 Oscars. And it comes out of Spielberg's cinephilia. He loved these sorts of movies as a kid, and he's only ever done one remake before that, and it was Always, which would have been better not remade.
Yeah.
So I was a bit worried about it when it was announced, and then I just thought it was better than the original. I thought to take that story that we all know and find a way to actually modernize it, update it. I mean, big credits obviously there to Tony Kushner. Yeah. Who I find a really interesting writing partner for Spielberg. And yeah, you say yourself, that just back to basics, but Spielberg basics are the most advanced basics in the world. There's a scene in West Side Story talk about the kind of the Spielberg wanna, because this is the thing people always say, there's nothing, Spielberg doesn't really have anything visually stylistic that you can say about him. He's not as stylish as a Scorsese. He's not as, and I know you haven't said that, but I don't think that's true at all. And if you take a look at, say, something like Goodfellas, and we all know the famous big, long tracking shot into the Copacabana, and it's done in a way, or the opening of Boogie Nights, which is Paul Thomas Anderson riffing on that, and it's done in a way to tell the audience, I am here as a director, look how fucking awesome I am. I can do this with a camera. Spielberg does that all the time for 2, 3, 3.5 minutes. He has the most incredible way of, over 3-4 minutes, basically what someone else would do with 5 or 6 edits, and he does it with one shot. And within one shot, he'll give you a wide angle, he'll give you an overhead, he'll give you a low angle, and it's all about, and the fluidity of his camera movement is second to none. And there's a brilliant sequence in West Side Story where they're walking into the dance hall, and you would think it would be like 8 shots edited together, and it's not. It's one shot. It's about 2 to 3 minutes, and it follows people down the hallway. They go into the big dance hall, and then you get this big overhead shot of everybody dancing, and then you get this low angle shot to focus it, and then it all comes back to the people who've entered the room, and it's like, oh, there's going to be a fight here, and it's all done in one sweeping movement with this beautiful smooth crane. And that's the other person that we haven't mentioned. Since Schindler's List, of course, every Steven Spielberg movie's been shot by the same person. He's never, ever worked with anybody since then other than Janusz Kaminski. Probably the greatest work in cinematography. Well, Roger Deakins, Janusz Kaminski. Sorry. No, you just asked me about West Side Story, and then you lost 10 minutes of your life.
No,
I'm sorry.
You're all right. I mean, he's definitely up there. But that's the thing, that's that point about people saying it's not like he's got a recognisable style. And then I go, okay, go and watch Jurassic Park, and then go and watch Catch Me If You Can, and tell me that he's not deviated from his usual style in Catch Me If You Can, because he absolutely has. He starts doing the handheld stuff, he starts using frantic cuts, which he doesn't normally do, and it works perfectly for that instance, but you look at the rest of it, and it's absolutely not like that. It's a much more grounded experience for most of the time with Spielberg, which, grounded in the sense that, like, it isn't darting all over the place. Like, it moves, but it doesn't kind of frantically move.
Yeah, typically really moves smoothly. Yeah. I mean, Schindler's List is a shift. It's an abrupt, and he starts using more hand. And sometimes, Munich is more like that. It just depends, obviously, on what kind of material he's working with. But that the camera is like a character, and it takes you in a way that really creates an intimacy between you as the viewer and what you're watching. You feel like you're there in a way that you don't when things are just being edited to hell. Yeah. And you've got 3-second shots, 5-second shots. You're on people's shoulder, but then you leave their shoulder and you move somewhere else. And it's typically done very smoothly, either with steady cams or cranes. And it's tiny little bits of movies, and you think there's a scene, just because I was rewatching it this week, it's the only reason why it's in my head. I'm not that strange. There's a scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark really early on where Marcus Brody is basically saying to Indy, go after the Ark, and Indiana Jones is packing a suitcase, and it's just the two of them in Indiana Jones's bedroom, but the camera is constantly moving, otherwise it would be an incredibly boring shot. And at the very end, Marcus is like, oh, just be careful, this one's more dangerous than anyone you've ever gone after before, Indy. And he's like, oh, Marcus, you're starting to sound like my mother, and you know me, I'm a cautious person. And he tosses his gun into the suitcase. Any other director, just for sheer ease of capturing the shot, would have edited that. Yeah. And you would have seen the beginning of the gesture, and then it would have edited to a close-up shot of the suitcase, and the gun would have landed. And he doesn't. It's all this. The camera just pulls back ever so slightly, and then it pans across to and then it doesn't zoom in. It just gently, smoothly zooms in on the gun in the suitcase, and it's about 2.5 minutes. And he does that all the time in his movies. When you add that up across his, that's the style, and that's the intimacy, and that's the fluidity that nobody else does like that. It's tremendous.
Yeah, it's great. Last thing.
Sorry.
One of my favourite jokes in any Spielberg film is in Last Crusade, when they're like, he's an absolute hero. He speaks 1,000 languages. With any luck, he's got the Grail already. His hard cuts to him standing in a square going, "Does anyone here speak English?"
Yeah. And then later on, Sean Connery, Henry asks him. He says, "What? But you said Marcus would be fine." He's like, "Oh, come on, I was lying. He got lost in his own museum." Spielberg got slammed for 1941 because he so overtly tried to make a comedy and it wasn't funny.
Yeah.
And he got really there's a great documentary 2017 I think just called Spielberg. It's a bit fawning about him, but generally speaking, a good documentary. 2.5 hours. It was on HBO. It's online somewhere. And he genuinely sounds hurt. 1941, right. He's talking to the camera years later, and he's like, "That one really stung me. People just said it wasn't funny, but I can be funny." And he's like insisting. And I think he can. Some of his movies, even Schindler's List, and I know that's ridiculous, it has some really funny, and I know that's just a ridiculous thing to say, but when he's unintentionally funny, when he's not trying to overtly be funny, the best line in Indiana Jones' Last Crusade is when Indy's trying to break Sean Connery out of the castle. He goes to rescue his dad, and he's got the Grail diary in his pocket, and this Nazi soldier is like, "I'll take the diary, it's in your pocket." And Sean Connery's like, "Hey, my son wouldn't bring this diary all the way here." And Harrison Ford's just like, "It's like, you didn't, did you?" And then Sean Connery just says, "I should have mailed it to the Marx Brothers." And it's so funny. It's such a great line.
Okay, then.
Sorry, yeah.
Actually, to say 2021, my best film would have been Green Knight, but that's by the way.
Okay.
So the most recent one is The Fabelmans.
Yeah, which is just...
Does it reframe everything about his filmography or not? Because it's that thing, it did the opposite of what Megalopolis did for me.
Megalopolis has to be a good thing.
Yes, it is. Megalopolis made me look back at Coppola and go, "I don't like as many of these as I thought I did, and now I think you might be a bit of an idiot for some of them." Whereas with Fabelmans, I kind of get a lot more about various bits and pieces now, purely because and the thing is it's essentially the crux of E.T., except he's just done it for his own life and he's just told his own story. Yeah. But I was just enamoured with it. I just thought it was so... It felt like a return, again, it felt like a return back to classic Spielberg, this kind of emotional storytelling. All the performances were great. The script was really good. It was a cinephile's dream watching this kid learn the tricks of how to make films and all this sort of stuff. I just thought it was brilliant. It
is, and there's something, just as a quick aside and then just for the let's stick with the Fabelmans for a minute. But the quick aside is about the Fabelmans is it kind of says something about. Sometimes Spielberg ends up, we've just been talking about this, in this sort of slightly stodgy, bloated space. You're like, why isn't this film as good as it could be? And again, it's an interesting comparison with Scorsese, who's like a walking film school, and he just creates these lists of, here's 125 Japanese films you should see, and they just rolled out of my brain. And if you actually ask, when he's, on the rare occasion he's been pinned down on it, Spielberg talks about his favourite films and his favourite directors, you can kind of understand why he ends up producing the films that he does. He's not, I think... Ray Fiennes said this about him in the context of Schindler's List. He said he's not a particularly, I wouldn't say, an intelligent filmmaker. He's a very emotional filmmaker. And so it is the William Wylers and the John Fords. I mean, obviously great. John Ford's an incredible director, but if there's a reason why of all the classic Hollywood films that Spielberg could have remade in the late 80s, he picked a movie called A Guy Named Joe, which just doesn't need to be remade. It's not that good. And his sort of favourite movies of those eras that he's talked about are sort of Best Years of Our Lives, which is a great William Wyler film from the mid-40s, but, it's not Citizen Kane. It's not one of these sort of incredibly visually interesting, cinematically interesting films. It's just a really good 3-hour mid-40s. Here's a drama about guys coming home from war and how they adjust. And it's interesting that in The Fabelmans we see that the movie... His equivalent of The Last Crusade, which was my first movie on the big screen, was The Greatest Show on Earth, which is just a big bloated mess of a spectacle. And some of Spielberg's movies weirdly look like that. There's these incredible set pieces in them, but they don't come together. Hook is like that. Tintin is like that.
I would include Saving Private Ryan in that list.
Well, Saving Private Ryan's got a whole... have you ever read the William Goldman rant about Saving Private Ryan when it came out? Oh my God, he hated it. He was like, this is just terrible, and then he has a whole set of reasons why he thinks... Well, maybe I won't, because that'll be 5 minutes by itself. It's online if people want to read it. That was my sort of 13-year-old interaction with Spielberg. I was one of those insufferable kids at school who organised his friends to go to the movies at Friday night. And when Saving Private Ryan came out, they were all like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. My God, war is hell. And I was that 13-year-old who was like, the Thin Red Line's better. And actually, I'm not even sure Saving Private Ryan should win the Oscar. Although, Shakespeare in Love probably shouldn't have beaten it.
No.
So it's just really interesting that these movies that whenever Spielberg talks about classic Hollywood movies that he really loves and that inspire him, you kind of step back and you think, these aren't the greatest. Anyway, but Fabelmans, does it reframe? I think I don't know if it reframes, but it puts a lot of context explicitly on a lot of his films. Mm-hmm. It was always there implicitly, and clearly a big part of this is the fact that he was able to resolve his relationship with his father, his family situation, and so on. And I think when he won the Golden Globe for Fabelmans, he sort of spoke quite personally about how he'd been trying to put this story on screen for decades, and it was the story that kind of scared him the most. And you do see it if you go back to Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the way the kids, one of the kids, when Richard Dreyfuss is in the bathtub and so on, and the kids just screaming at him. It's like, you cry baby. And Spielberg said, his dad had an emotional breakdown at one point at home, and that's how he reacted to his dad. Obviously, E.T., the absent father, it's always been there. And then finally he tells this story in a very explicit way. And I think it reframes, recontextualizes a lot of his filmography. And I just thought it was a beautiful film, all the way down to the montages of how the camera works and how the editing works. And you actually see these little, how he came up with some of these little practical effects in his childhood movies. And you get this lovely dovetail to and then a few years later he's making Jewel. And it's I know a lot of people I saw it with or encouraged to watch it were like, it was fine. I think, and this is going to sound like an arsey thing to say, but I think the more you really love Spielberg or just love cinema, you're going to like that film more. And definitely. If you don't, you might find it a bit indulgent. Because it's a 2.5-hour movie about his childhood, so it is indulgent. Yeah. But I think he's earned the right.
100%. If anyone's earned the right, then he has.
Martin Scorsese going to do that? It's just going to be church all the time? Church and guilt? No thanks.
Church, guilt in New York, so... On Close Encounters, Spielberg came out after a few years after it and said, well, I said quite a few years after, and said, if I was making it now, I never would have ended it like that. And he said that the reason he wouldn't do it is because having been married and had kids of his own, it's the wrong ending. He wouldn't write that as a father now. He wouldn't play that. And so what I like about The Fabelmans is that it gave him the chance to sort of to look at that and it just showed it was basically like the better ending. It was like he'd sort of internalized that and had his own experiences now and was able to transpose them onto his own childhood growing up and stuff. And the Paul Dano character in that, I think, was so well drawn, like really, really spot on.
It's a beautiful performance, really understated performance. Yeah. I still can't believe Paul Dano doesn't have an Oscar nomination. He always does these slightly understated performances, and they're always so, like, There Will Be Blood doesn't work without him. Obviously it doesn't work without Daniel Day-Lewis. The Fabelmans doesn't work without him, but people sort of put the attention more on Michelle Williams because she had more obvious acting to do, I suppose. But the scene towards the end of Fabelmans where, I was going to say where Steven Spielberg, but where Sammy Fabelman, comes home and he's sort of basically having a panic attack, and his dad calms him down and explains how he calms his mum down or has in the past. It's just beautiful. It kind of makes me cry, and then it makes me laugh because of course the final scene of the movie immediately after that is one of the great cameos in the history of cinema, which maybe I won't say what that is because some people, Fabelmans was only a few years ago, maybe people haven't seen it.
Okay, well then let's get into the actual sort of award bit.
The really important stuff. This could be an opportunity to mention one or two films that we've skipped over.
Yes, definitely.
Maybe these are,
Definitely. I think we should start with score.
Oh, what a nightmare category.
again, this is like, picking from 400 different, so many
it's
things.
all John Williams, isn't it?
It
Unless
is.
you want to hold out for... There was one where he wasn't available. Didn't Thomas Newman do Bridge of Spies?
I think Thomas Newman did do Bridge of Spies, which is good, but I don't hum it. The only, do you know what? I find it's very strange. I find myself humming ever Schindler's List or Johnny English Reborn. Those are the two scores which, for some reason, are the ones that immediately just my body decides is going to be my sort of passing the time.
Interesting individual.
So the Schindler's List score is obviously one. So much of it was transposed over to Harry Potter. That same melody is absolutely in it. And then I was listening, and then I was watching Schindler's List after I'd seen Harry Potter, and I was like, what the hell's going on? Like, why is the music the same? And then I was like, oh, it's John Williams. I think I'm going to have to go with a list of Jurassic Park, Schindler's List, Jaws, and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Because... And as much as I love the E.T. score, and it does absolutely lift everything above,
including the bikes.
No,
that's obviously E.T.'s power.
Yes,
of course it is.
So for Jaws, I think any issues with the film in terms of the rubber shark or the problems with the filmmaking are completely eradicated by the score.
There are no issues with the problems of the film.
No.
Okay. Stick with the music.
What do I mean?
Let's stick with the music for now.
If the music wasn't there like that, then as you mentioned before, you wouldn't be able to sense things in the way that you do. And also, it's so incredibly... people think of it as this very, very basic score, as this kind of one chromatic fluctuation. But actually, when you get into the sort of the meat of that score, it's incredibly complex, and it's this kind of it does that bubbling effect really well of the effect of something rising up from below, and all the light string instruments like the harp at the top make it sound sort of ocean-y and it works absolutely perfectly. It
does, and some of the best bits of the soundtrack of the score to me are the bits that would the bits that are set to the on Amity at the beginning before they go out into the boat, and it's actually there's none of that ominous stuff at all because the shark's not there. It's just and when they sail out, I can't remember the name of the track on the soundtrack, but there's a great little melody where basically the orca, the three, they're going out to hunt the shark, and it's all kind of. There is an ominous sense of threat because they know what they're going to confront, but at that point, they're all just laughing and joking, and Quint's sort of just, doing his Irish lyrics and singing his songs on the jetty, and the music's quite fun and quite playful. No, I think Jaws is a tremendously dense soundtrack. We always reduce it. You're right to but no, it's so much more than that.
Yeah. Jurassic Park, I almost didn't include purely because Jurassic World just ruined it. It makes you wait in Jurassic Park for that main melody to kick in, and it's that moment where Sam Neill takes the glasses off and sees all the dinosaurs and stuff, and it really, really hits home. And then in Jurassic World, it plays over the top of like a theme park, and you go, I think you don't really know what you're using this for. But again, so much of that score is more than just that main melody. It's this kind of it gets really tense, and the bit where it gets most tense for me is the velociraptors in the kitchen, which is still one of the most terrifying sequences that people have made for anything, and it really sort of hitches there, and it sort of grounds everything, and it's low, and it gets you in feeling as scared as you're supposed to be. I absolutely love all of the Jurassic Park theme. Raiders of the Lost Ark is just like, if you ever hear it live, it just bangs. There's no two ways about it. It's just the perfect adventure score. And then Schindler's List again is like
so hummable.
Yeah,
you said it.
So hummable.
Is just.
But it doesn't do the Braveheart thing of going, we've got one riff which is really nice. Let's use that all of the time. True. It uses the main bit sparingly, and obviously, you get John Williams working with Ishtak Perlman to create the most gorgeous sounding violin, in the history of cinema, and it just lands all of it, and the tone of it is perfect, and it doesn't feel disingenuous, despite the fact that it is a melancholy score. It doesn't feel, and because it's used sparingly in the film, it doesn't feel sort of gratuitous at all. It feels completely kind of earned and earnest when it actually takes over, and it's difficult to get right. It's also a fairly sort of, this is by the by, but it is a fairly sort of Jewish sounding melody.
Yeah.
It's that kind of, that melodic frequency that it uses is prevalent in so many, like Jewish prayer songs and things like that, and it absolutely lands in every way it needs to, I think.
I agree. I mean, Schindler's List is in my 5. Then it is, and so is Jaws. And then it's just impossible. It is impossible because you think, well, it's all John Williams. Nobody else is going in here. I mean, the music is obviously so fundamentally important to Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yeah.
I mean, so fundamentally important. So I feel like I want something in that more fantastical space. And maybe rather than going with E.T., I would go with Close Encounters, because again, that's another one. The last 25 minutes of that film, there's no dialogue. There's hardly any dialogue, and it's just the most beautiful combination of music, sound, images. I mean, it really is pure cinema. The last 20 or so minutes of Close Encounters, and I just let the whole credits run when I rewatched it this week. Oftentimes, I stop the movie because I'm like, I want to go get coffee or whatever. And I just let the whole credits play out because it was just this beautiful soundtrack. So I'm going to go Close Encounters, Jaws, Schindler's List.
Yep.
How do you not put an Indiana Jones? You've got to put Raiders in, haven't you? But let me hold the 5th slot, because I know where I'm putting in 4th. Catch Me If You Can.
Yeah,
I mean,
really good.
I mean, talk about John Williams doing something that he just doesn't usually do. This kind of evocation of that sort of 50s type jazz scores. It's so light, it's so breezy. I mean, I love that film. I think that's just that's flawless film.
I think it's perfect.
And the music is from those opening credits, the sort of, again, harking back to the sort of 50s Hitchcock type opening credits. It just puts you in time and place so well. So I'm going with that for 4th, and then I guess 5th I'm tossing up now between Raiders, but you already said Raiders, so I'm going with Empire of the Sun.
Yeah.
Because whilst that movie has problems and it gets very, very mawkish at the end, like just so soft and sentimental at the end. There's a scene towards the end involving a sword, a mango, and drops of blood, which is just, almost laughable in its sentiment at the end of this tremendously, movie. In a lot of respects, tremendous movie. But the score is, and again, if there's just one track, if people don't want to invest their whole life listening to John Williams scores, just go on to Spotify or wherever you get your music and listen to Cadillac of the Skies, which is one of the soundtrack songs. It's where the American planes bomb the Japanese internment camp, and Christian Bale's running up and down. A very young Christian Bale is running up and down the roof because the B-51 or something, or 52, is the Cadillac of the Skies, and he's running up and down while all this destruction's going on around him. And fundamentally, whilst he's probably scared, he's mostly just fascinated that he's seeing this plane that he finds so amazing. And the score, Cadillac, that particular track, Cadillac of the Skies. So I'm going Empire of the Sun, Catch Me If You Can, Jaws, Schindler's List, and Close Encounters.
Yeah, I think that's a good list. But that, again, on that sort of that slightly mawkish ending, I think Spielberg can sometimes be a little bit guilty of that every now and again. It's like, and she's kneading the bread as the car arrives outside. She's a nice person and she's going to be giving bad news. Is anyone getting this at the back? All this sort of stuff. But yeah, I think, the
most annoying version of it, I would say, you mentioned this film earlier, is just the a man breaking down in Arlington. Tell me I've been a good man. Oh, yeah. Tell me I've lived a good life. And I'm like, I barely know you. You were a very minor supporting character in the movie. This is a terrible emotional frame for the story. We care about Tom Hanks. We're not really that interested in you. The most extended conversation we've had with you as a viewer, Matt Damon, is you telling this awful story about how horrible you and your brothers were to a girl in a barn, which kind of sounds like sexual assault. So you probably didn't live a good life.
Yeah, probably not.
That was Saving Private Ryan.
All right, then best short film.
Best cinematography. Yes.
I've got a much different list for this, I think.
Then what?
Than what you might expect.
Okay. Go on. How much Kaminsky have you got? Because when I was looking at this, again, as we said earlier, everything's in Schindler's List as Kaminsky. And before that, Spielberg had a really rotating cast of very, very good cinematographers. But, Empire of the Sun and E.T. shot by the same cinematographer, Jurassic Park, and I think Hook by the same cinematographer. Yeah. And then sometimes he just would hire people for one film and not go back to them. Always, I can't even remember who shot Always now, but it was think Mikhail Solomon shot Always.
Right.
1941 was shot by someone that he never worked with again. Jaws was shot by someone, Bill Butler, that he never worked with again.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know that his original concept, talking about cinematography, Spielberg, I don't know if this is true, but it's been said by people who worked on the movie that his original idea was to nail down the cameras on the ship to create this real sense of movement. And his director of cinematographer said to him, if you do this, everyone is going to be throwing up in the in the aisles. It won't work.
Yeah.
And eventually convinced him to not do that. Anyway, best cinematography. Yes.
So one of these I'm slightly regretting, but I have to be honest. It's sort of the only good thing about it, but Tintin does look absolutely brilliant, and that annoys me because the rest of it is a mess. But particularly some of the transitions from one scene to another are not just like, oh, that was a cool computer tech. It was like you've got the creativity to actually come up with that as a transition, to execute it in the way you have, which, just because you've got access to computers and CGI has been proven a million times. That doesn't mean that you can make things look nicer the way you want it to. And this really, really does look, I mean, obviously it is a bit uncanny valley with the whole motion capture thing, but like it's quite adventurous in the sense that when moving from one place to another, I think it does it in a seamless way that no animated film has actually tried to replicate. And that annoys me sometimes, because animated films sometimes could do more to move from one space to the next instead of just cutting, which quite often they do. But this, it sort of lets you bathe in the fact that this is like, Tintin is a world-crossing adventure. And so let's see the folds of that world, unraveling themselves. And I really love watching that.
That's a very good case.
Probably still wrong, but...
That's not wrong, it's just your opinion. It's not in my top 5.
No, fair enough. I've also got Empire of the Sun in it.
Yes, okay, we have both have that, I think. I wanted one by Alan, I don't know how you pronounce his name. Davio? I don't know how you pronounce his name. I'll go with Davio. But I think he's a great cinematographer. 5 Oscar nominations, no wins. Should he have won for this? He had the misfortune of competing against the great Vittorio Storaro for The Last Emperor, which swept the 1987 Oscars. And you kind of have to look at that and say, okay, that's a coin toss. And E.T., well, I don't know what he lost to Gandhi, I presume, won cinematography. But even if Gandhi did win cinematography that year, what should have won cinematography that year in '82, which wasn't even nominated, famously, was Blade Runner. But yeah, I've got Empire of the Sun in. Okay. I don't know if it was your pick, so you might want to say something.
I just think that despite the sort of, and some of it is more hammed up than you would maybe want it to be, but it does. It's weird. The one that I compare it to most is West Side Story. In terms of what it looks like similarly. I just think it does that really kind of expansive cinematography really, really nicely. It does get its message across through the images it shows you, more so than in the dialogue, I think. And that matters on a film that's dealing with something like this.
It is another one of those movies where quite extended sequences are basically, well, they're not montages because there's no edits. They're these sort of, or maybe a collection of a few longer takes set to music, and you're seeing, the transition, then Christian Bale's characters in the camp, and the way Spielberg communicates how that camp works and the black market and how, money and goods and cigarettes are flowing around that camp is done through these really beautiful long takes with, again, these smooth camera movements, and then the taking of the fall of Shanghai to the Japanese, and the way that the shots are composed in a way that you see all of the anguish and fear on this kid's face, who's been a kind of cocky, arrogant little shit up to that point, and you're kind of like, you're a really annoying child, and then all of this chaos and violence starts erupting around him. And not a lot of dialogue. It's the score again, and it's the close-ups and the low angles on the kid, on Jim, and then these much wider shots of the destruction and the shooting and the combat. It's a beautifully shot film. Yeah.
I also have Schindler's List.
Yes, me too.
Because I mean, it is breathtaking in the way that it looks. The black and white was a smart decision, I think, and also it feels like the cinematography is actually, it makes it feel like more of an important film because it actually doesn't really shy away from much at all. I know that some accounts recall things being even more brutal than they are actually depicted in the film, but I still think that the cinematography doesn't shy away from anything at all. And what I love is the juxtaposition of space. There's a lot of very tight cinematography going on in here, like even when he's just strolling around his office compiling the list of names, because of the black and the white, there's so much darkness in those frames. It very much, there's just loads of mirroring going on, and particularly one of the scenes that I think of is on the hot day when they're all on the train carriages, and which is horrible. I mean, really, really horrible. But you get that exact same lighting sequence, which is that there is one light source in this room, and it will light up as much as it will light up and no more, and there won't be any faux efforts to light up any more of this room than that. And it all slides together really, really nicely. I think the black and white also makes Hearst look even more evil than we thought, and. Yeah, that one sequence where the girl in red walks down the street, it looks brilliant, and it's sort of etched its way into the history of cinema. So I can't not have it.
No, it's it. I mean, for me, it might even be number one. I mean, it invented a style of filming traumatic historical events almost, and all the way down to Agnieszka Holland's Green Border a year or so ago, and she was like, "This film looks the way it looks." Because of the influence of what Spielberg and Kaminski did in Schindler's List. They invented a type of language to communicate these sorts of horrors and atrocities. And it's hard to imagine Schindler's List in colour.
Yes.
It's really, really different. Occasionally you see Spielberg hasn't let that many of he hasn't let that much imagery of the production out. He's controlled that quite carefully. But there are bits and pieces of that you can watch of footage of it being filmed, and it's in colour, and obviously because it was they weren't in black and white, and it just doesn't. I mean, the reason why it doesn't work is because we know the film, but it just doesn't feel right, whatever that means. And again, Kaminski is the master of lighting, and we see that comes in immediately here in Schindler's List, and the use of. I mean, Kaminski described this. He was like, I pretty much always shot Ralph Fiennes' character, Eamon Goth, in just light. He's just lit, because there's no ambiguity about this person. There's no shades of grey to this character. Whereas with Schindler, he was like, I was conscious to use the lighting and the shadows to basically bring him out of the shadows as the film progresses, as he kind of finds whatever it is that he finds, a moral purpose, a cause, whatever we want to describe it. And that's Kaminski, and that's lighting. And Kaminski's described the difference between Lost World, Jurassic Park, which was his second film with Spielberg, and the original Jurassic Park, which was Dean Cundey. And again, the difference of lighting and the sort of the darkness of the Lost World compared to Jurassic Park's a pretty bright film. Those dinosaurs are out there in the light, and the Lost World is very dark, very nighttime, very brooding. Schindler's List, yes. So we got two the same.
I also,
you had Tintin.
I did have Tintin, but I've also got Jurassic Park.
Okay.
Because they made the dinosaurs look real, and it's still when that T-Rex pokes through that still looks good today, and that was 1993, and that's it's practical, and it's weird. It's not this great technical achievement of cinematography, but what it is absolutely, I think, perfect in each bit. And one of my favourite bits is the argument in the projector room with Jeff Goldblum. And I love that is sort of softly and dimly lit, that whole thing, because it just adds a level of malevolence to this whole kind of ordeal. And
well, is that when they're having the lunch and the big screens and stuff are behind them, these big beams of light are coming through. Yeah, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they didn't stop to think whether they should.
I quoted that in a Model UN speech a couple of weeks ago.
Did anyone get it?
No, you actually did. But I did also preface it with, as Jeff Goldblum once said.
Oh, well, then
I think people did get it, so that's that. I mean, I just think it's great. And then my last one is a bit of a left turn, but it is Minority Report. Because
it's a great pick.
It's a pretty good action film, and they are not always easy to get right. And it's technical in the sense that it's not practical. It's having to deal with a lot of technology in this particular instance. and yes, it is cliched in what it's doing, but it is the best at doing those cliches.
Yeah.
And but, you know, part of the reason why I like Minority Report is because it just looks so damn cool for so much of it. It's not this great world-beating thing, but I just really get on with it, and it's one of the reasons why I like throwing it on, just because it looks great.
It's a tremendous film. It would have been so easy with a movie like that to just slip into the kind of the typical way of representing a slightly dystopic near future. And again, Janusz Kaminski being as masterful as he could have just made it look like Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Derivative. And he didn't. If anything, he went back to kind of, early noir films and stuff. A lot of blues in this film. Yeah, no, it's a great... I mean, I have a similar era one in my top 5, which is Munich.
Okay.
Because I just think... I won't go on too long about it, but it's... Each of the spaces... It's an incredibly complicated movie. It moves from Beirut to Paris to... It's like 4 or 5 destinations in it, 4 or 5 locations in it. And each one looks like a different movie. They're all very different color tones, very different color palettes, but still the whole thing remains tremendously, coherent. And it kind of has this sort of 1970s thriller vibe about it, because fundamentally that's what it was, set in the 70s, and it kind of looks like a William Friedkin, Owen Rosamund type movie from the 70s, and maybe my inner geek just likes that. But so that's my slightly later stage one. But I could sub it for Minority Report, and I think it's a great, that yours is a great pick. So I got I got Munich, I got Schindler's List, and Empire of the Sun. Even though we had issues with the movie, again, just for the technical mastery and the no one has ever done this better, and I don't think anybody could have done it for the first 30 minutes alone, Saving Private Ryan. Yeah. And I don't know how much more needs to be said about the way that film captures war. And again, the way they did it, literally chronologically, taking the beach yard by yard by yard, day after day after day with the filming. And the use of the handheld camera, the in and the out of the water, the ability to completely immerse you in a space, whilst also keeping a sense of the spatiality of it, is just the most terrifically organized brutality and chaos. And the fifth one for me is Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is the great Vilma Sigmund. And I just, again, maybe because I rewatched it this week, the types of shots I associate with Spielberg movies. One is shots of spaceships and lights and big grand sort of optics like that, and the other one is the suburban city lit up beautifully with a beautiful sky, usually shot from some distance at the top of a hill, which is there in E.T., which is there in a lot of his movies. But it's never been better, I don't think, and it's never been more beautiful than Close Encounters. And there's a whole story about how they basically rethought the shooting of this film as it was going. Initially, it was supposed to be much more of a sort of a claustrophobic kind of feel. And then as the film evolved and the sort of the effects work was evolving and keeping up with the concept, they eventually settled on, actually, do you know what we want for the end? We want to build this entire massive space, and we're going to see the whole spaceship, and then we're going to layer the things on and so on, and it's just one of the most beautiful films I think that's ever been made. So I've got 1 Zygmunt, 1 Daviu, if that's how we're agreeing to pronounce him, Empire of the Sun, and 3 Kaminskis, which kind of feels...
I think that's about right, doesn't it? Yeah. Whatever reservations I have with Close Encounters, the way it looks is not one of them. It does look fantastic.
You just don't think people should do that with mashed potatoes. It's bad. It's bad table manners. At this point, anyone who's listening is like, "What? Mashed potatoes?" But yeah, it's just.
It's just. I actually think it's a bit choppy. I think it's a bit messy. Close Encounters. But it looks brilliant. There's no denying that. So yeah, good list. Now, when we're doing performances,
go on.
I haven't done supporting and leading. Okay. I've just done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 6 male performances.
Oh wow! Okay.
And then 1, 2, 3 female performances.
Oh damn! Right.
Because
we have to think on our feet. I got 5 lead actors, 5 supporting actors.
Okay.
But actress and supporting actress, I do have lists of 5, but I wouldn't want to go through them because I think we got a lot of wives, we got a lot of mothers.
Yes, that's something I want to talk about. Is like
love interests.
Spielberg very rarely centres women in his films, and sort of the one time when he has, he still managed to sort of completely kind of whitewash the story, right?
Okay, yes, indeed.
They
Although
are...
Whoopi Goldberg is...
Well, again, she's on my list because she's just brilliant. But they're often left to the emotional margins of things. So the wives in Saving Private Ryan or in Jaws or in War Horse or whatever, the vast majority of his stories are around male protagonists. They're soldiers, they're fathers, they're scientists, they're boys coming of age, and then women are more often than not relegated to sort of symbolic roles. So they're kind of there just to support the male emotional arcs. They don't drive the narrative themselves. There are exceptions, like we said, Colour Purple, and The Fabelmans gave Michelle Williams a sort of more showy, complex role, but ultimately she was still a mother and a wife, and that was it. It was all about her impact on the family, nothing else outside of that. Yes, she wanted to have this big career, but actually we didn't follow that happening, or we just sort of followed was everyone's male perception of her. Lincoln obviously has Sally Field.
Oh, she's awful in that film.
Yeah, I mean it's the sort of the please give me an award performance, chewing enormous chunks of the scenery.
She was better in the opening montage at the Oscars. That was that awful year where Seth MacFarlane did it.
Oh, right.
Sally Field actually was in the opening montage. Seth MacFarlane's riding on the horse with Sally. He's like, come with me, Sally Field. And she's like, no, I have to get ready for the Oscars. And he's like, no, come ride off with me in the sunset. They're going to give it to Anne Hathaway. And Sally Field's just like, you're right, they're going to give it to Anne. And she just jumps on the horse. So she can poke fun at herself. She's better in that montage than she was in Lincoln.
Yes, like even those performances are filtered through male legacy and perspectives. But despite the sort of emotionally rich nature of Spielberg, the structures are patriarchal, I think, for the most part. They excel at depicting boyhood wonder or coming of age or paternal duty or masculine grief or anything. But they rarely have offered the same kind of space or complexity to the female characters. So that's just something worth saying. And it's not the fact that the female actors in these films aren't good, it's the fact that there aren't enough spaces for those performances to stand out properly, I think, is the main...
I think that's spot on, yeah. And yeah, because I think if we start, we'll be talking... I mean, on my supporting actress list, let's not dwell on them, but I had Melinda Dillon from Close Encounters of the Third. Okay. She was Oscar nominated for that.
Yep.
I had Ariana DeBose in West Side Story.
Good.
She won an Oscar for that. Obviously, Oprah Winfrey in Colour Purple. But I wasn't, I didn't particularly want to say that much about any of these performances, not really, because they're sort of fine. But I had a few performances by actresses in his film that I thought would be good to dwell on.
Right.
But I can get it down to 5 easy.
Yeah, get it down to 5.
Supporting actors, lead actors more difficult, but I can do it. I can do it.
Well, so I've only got 3. I've only got 3 of the female performances.
Okay. Would you want to start?
Yeah. Well, let's start with Whoopi Goldberg because
let's marginalise women in this podcast the way women have been marginalised in Spielberg films.
But the point is it's indicative, is what I'm trying to say.
It is absolutely. We're just mirroring the man. That's what we're doing. Yeah.
So. Everything Whoopi Goldberg has to do, she does 1.5 times better than it needs doing. And what's slightly frustrating about that is because I think you could have given her a closer representation of the original source material, and she would have just flown, and it would have been this kind of great, historically properly remembered performance, rather than this kind of this thing you sort of have to go looking for if you're looking through the Steven Spielberg list. But she's so sort of powerful. It's a real it's an all over the place. It's a tour de force performance, and she has to go everywhere. She has to do everything, and she does all of it really, really well.
She does first film performance as well. I mean, she was stand-up, basically known as a stand-up comedian. Well, was a stand-up comedian before this. I agree with you. I think she'd be in my 5 for those reasons. But again, the problems aren't with her performance. The problems are with the film. Absolutely. And I think if you'd have given her more to do, she'd have hit it out the park, because she tends to hit things out the park. Whoopi Goldberg. I have a soft spot for Whoopi Goldberg. I've always liked Whoopi Goldberg.
She's so much fun.
Yeah. So, but sorry, go on. I don't know if we're going back and forward or if you're going to...
I was going to move to the next. So, Amy Adams in Catch Me If You Can.
Oh, wow, okay. Didn't even consider that.
You see, it's because it's a sort of a role that's written to fall on its arse. But she just doesn't make that happen. It's this kind of really kind of wet behind the ears, innocent type, swept along by Leo DiCaprio character, and yet there's an incredible vulnerability about her, which I really, really believed. I think she plays it perfectly for that particular circumstance. It's not an easy, it's almost like a degrading part to do, because there's sort of like nothing else going on other than sort of like desperately clinging to the coattails sort of thing.
Oh, she's presented as this kind of this sort of simple character who just like lives at home with Martin Sheen and watches that awful television show
with a horrible song, which has become just a huge joke amongst me and my friends from home. Is just singing that horrible song about Kathy, I think it is. Has anybody here seen Kelly? Has anyone here seen Kelly? Has anyone here seen Kelly? Kelly from the Emerald Isle. That's it.
Please don't play it.
Yes. That's not an easy performance, and yet I still completely believed it the whole time. And again, that's a male-dominated film, and I think that's a crucial part of it. And also, it's nice to watch a sort of like a springboard performance. That's the very, very early days of Amy Adams, and she's gone on to be one of the best around. So I really like watching sort of that kind of...
She's overrated.
Section. Okay. The other one, and this is, I think if I was going to have to pick the one, it would be this, is Frances O'Connor in AI.
Wow, we have very different lists.
Everything...
You're more creative than me.
Really?
Well, you're coming up with more interesting picks. Mine are really boring. I don't want to show them. Carry on, Frances O'Connor.
Everything about being the mother in that film is all of the hard work of that film, because the kid's great, the kid's very good, but you basically say to the kid, could you try and sort of just say things really innocently and emotionlessly, and that's kind of what we're going for. Whereas all of the pain that the audience feels, that moment where she has to leave him and go away, that is all, the driving work is all done by Frances O'Connor, because the sad bit is the reaction from the kid, but you don't get that reaction without feeling her pain first. And it's one of the rare occasions where I think Spielberg puts the emotion of the woman first in a really, really key scene. It's not like we're seeing it through the kid's eyes. It's like, for once we are with her and she has to let go of her child, basically. And that really hurts. And for the rest of the time, she's constantly having to do this hard job of like, are you my son? Are you not my son? What are you in my life? And she plays it absolutely bang on. It's not easy, and by the end of it, I think I really emotionally resonated with her. And that scene is one of the most sort of like tear-jerky things I think in a Steven Spielberg film. Obviously, I've E.T. going home and all sorts of stuff, but that moment really sort of, and I watched it I think relatively young, and it was the idea of sitting down with a parent and them saying, I've literally got to leave you behind, was kind of this oof. And obviously again that comes from the past elements of Spielberg, but I just thought that
the shot
for that
as
moment
well,
it's so beautiful shot.
I'm losing my words. The mirror, the rear view mirror. You can tell I don't drive. I can't even name basic parts of cars. The rear view mirror, yeah. Okay. Wow. No. Is that your three?
That's my three. Yeah.
Oh well. I don't want to talk. It's going to be embarrassing. I haven't given it that much thought. So I wanted to just briefly on the Michelle Williams thing, because I feel weird not having her in my five.
Yeah.
And eventually I just didn't put her in because I couldn't decide if she was a lead or a supporting.
Yes,
not that we've broken it that way now. And if you want to have a sort of stand-in for the mother, I couldn't pick between her and Dee Wallace-Stone in E.T.
Right.
So in the end I was just like, I have to. And then I thought, well, should I have one of the sort of sidekick girlfriend type roles? And I was like, Karen Allen's pretty cool in Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, she can drink.
Yes.
I mean, I love these. One of my favourite scenes is when she's drinking with the French guy, Belloc, and she's genuinely drunk, not play drunk like in the beginning where she's playing the drinking game in a Nepalese bar or wherever they are, in Nepal, isn't it? And she's so funny in that scene when she sort of picks up the knife, and then a few minutes later she sort of holds it out threateningly. He bursts out laughing. She bursts out laughing. And he presents her that big dress, doesn't he? The big white dress. He's like, I'd very much like to see you in it. And she's stuffing her face with bread because she's so hungry. And she's just like, I bet you would. She's so good. But I've not got her on my list. I thought about Meryl Streep in The Post, but that's just too obvious, and I don't like that movie. So I have Whoopi Goldberg, which we both talked about. So I, just circling back briefly to Sugarland Express, which, again, I think people should see it. It's a really interesting point in Spielberg's early films. Goldie Hawn is, I mean, actually in a sense, the film that he's made that most, it's his Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. That's what it is. I never thought about it like that. It's basically his these are the movies I do, and between Jewel and Jaws, and same with Scorsese, between Mean Streets and Taxi Driver, here's a sort of much smaller, stripped-back social drama that centers a female character. And Goldie Hawn is tremendous in that movie. She finds this great balance between all the sort of hysterics and quite sort of high-pitched stuff that Goldie Hawn's so famous for as a comedian. You know, she's very... she's always all over the place and a bit... Just the whole personality of a Goldie Hawn performance is it's sort of all a bit disorganized, a bit, dare I say it, ditzy. That's the personality that she had as an actress, and she was great at it. But obviously here, she's a very young woman who just desperately wants to be reunited with her kid, who's been taken away from her and put into care for reasons that she thinks is unfair, and they end up on this it's one of these movies where one mistake leads to the next mistake leads to the next mistake, and she very early on in the movie breaks her boyfriend, the father of the kid, out of prison. It's not a dramatic breakout, it's just a walkout, because it's sort of like a pre-release centre that he's in. And then it becomes this road movie, because they just keep making one mistake after another. They get caught by the cops, and it's like, we can't be caught by the cops, so we'll have to kidnap the cop. And then that's the rest of the movie, is the cop, Goldie Hawn, and her boyfriend in this car. And she's in almost every frame of the movie, and she's terrific in it. So I'm going with Goldie Hawn. Sorry, I realised that was very boring for you, because you haven't seen the movie. Whoopi. And then the last two I'm going to mention is let's start on the low and finish on the high. Let's start on the miserable one.
Yeah.
Embeth Davidtz in Schindler's List. And I don't know if we wanted to, but she's just... You could get that again, a movie that's principally about three men, but she is, as probably sort of the fourth most significant character in terms of screen time. There's a scene in the basement when she's in Ralph Fiennes' domestic, servant, isn't she? And Liam Neeson, Schindler, comes down, and she's just talking to him, and she describes, Ralph Fiennes the previous day. He walked out, and he just shot this woman through the throat, and I couldn't understand what it was that had bothered him about her. She was no faster or slower or fatter or thinner, and just the way it's just all in the line delivery, and I think she's just tremendously powerful in that film at articulating, particularly in that scene, the complete randomness and banality of this evil and this violence that she's living with every day. And from the second you kind of first see her, where she's sort of trembling in the snow and really doesn't want to be anywhere near this guy, and she doesn't put her hand up when he says, which of you have got domestic experience? And it's a trick. And then you're like, oh shit. I just think, tremendous. Everyone always talks about Fiennes, Kingsley, and Neeson in that film. My last one, Laura Dern. Laura Dern. I mean, she's the best version of that Linda Hamilton, Sigourney Weaver kind of thing, because it's dialed down so much. She doesn't start out like that. She's just into the plants. She's like, Alan, this shouldn't be here. This berry has been dead for years. And you're like, okay. And then slowly but surely, she's the sort of problem solver of the film. He's just trying to keep the kids alive. Important. Jeff Goldblum just ends up lying around for most of the movie with his shirt provocatively open, sweating. Which is not an unappealing thing, but still, he's not really doing very much. And she's the one who, I'll go down and get the lights back on. I'll run through the forest. I'll challenge. She's the one who calls John Hammond out on his shit when she's eating the ice cream.
I love the ice cream scene. It's so great.
She's just so dismissive of it. She's like, you never had control. That was the illusion. So Laura Dern's probably actually my top pick. Yeah. Sorry, Whoopi Goldberg.
No, I nearly put Laura Dern in. Also, there are all the reasons why I didn't... there are so many great female performances in Schindler's List because a few scenes focus solely on sort of the horrific events that were unfolding from their perspective, and that is a lot. So I could have I could have put any of them in all honesty.
It's just bleak though. It saps the energy out of it. We don't want to talk about these scenes from Schindler's List. I promise I won't mention another one.
Okay, well then, because do you know what, I can actually split these acting ones into supporting and non-support and then leading. So why don't I do that? Let's do that. Okay. Supporting ones then. And I'm not actually... I don't know that all of these are great.
There's so many.
But So Mark Rylance in The Bridge of Spies, because I love that quiet kind of performance. It was almost kind of like a sort of loud, quiet performance in the sense that it was sort of slightly obvious, but I still really, really enjoyed it. And that line of Aren't You Nervous? Would it help?
Would it help?
It just, I absolutely adore that.
I think that's why he won the Oscar.
It probably is, in all honesty, that one thing, because I think he says it twice in the film, but he's so kind of measured. And actually, fun fact about Mark Rylance is he doesn't believe that Shakespeare wrote his plays.
No?
He's a Shakespearean skeptic.
Okay.
Which is a really weird thing.
Is he right? No, that's another hour, isn't it? No, don't. And I would have nothing to offer. So,
but
Gwyneth Paltrow wrote the plays.
Obviously, as we now know, yes, she did. Yeah. She was definitely the muse for it. Yeah,
completely.
So that's one. I think you're right in that he lies around with his shirt open for ages. But that one scene where Jeff Goldblum just takes people to task and tells them that they didn't stop to think about it. It's so expertly delivered. It's the best dialogue for Jeff Goldblum too, who is completely mental. I always knew he was a bit kind of enthusiastic and eccentric, but recently he was on the Off Menu podcast, and it was this constant stream of like, I like macadamia nuts. Do you like the shelling of it? Here's how I like my peanuts. And it was like, just finish a sentence. Just one thought would be so wonderful, mate. If we could just get one thought out of you, that'd be great.
It sounds like my lectures.
But like, that's that sort of, what I like about that line delivery as well is that it doesn't get that angry, and then when he starts slapping the table when he talks about you're selling it, you're selling it,
slapping on a plastic lunchbox, and now he's selling it.
I absolutely love that, and it makes it so much more impactful. And it's like, oh yeah, no, Jeff Goldblum is really actually quite good at this whole acting lark, even if then for the rest of it he just sort of unbuttons his shirt and lies about. But that one scene sticks in my head massively from Jurassic Park, so that's in. And
he is a damn flirt with that water thing.
So is.
I mean, I've tried that with people before. Now just freeze your hand. And it's never worked. I've tried that with so many guys. It's never worked once. Honestly.
And the other one, you might sort of roll your eyes, but it's Tommy Lee Jones in Lincoln. Because that's quite a boring part.
It is, in a boring
film. But that's the not boring bit, I think, for me, is watching. The good bit of Lincoln is the performances. That's what it's
apart from Sally
there
Field,
for.
Aforementioned discussion. Yes, no, I agree. He's a good element of Lincoln. It's one of those movies that genuinely, I was so excited for it. It disappointed me so much. And I was like, how can this go wrong? Daniel Day-Lewis, Tommy Lee Jones, Tony Kushner adapting a Pulitzer Prize-winning piece of history that everyone's read or at least knows about.
Yeah.
And then I was just like, this is so flat, painterly and just slow and yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not. I mean, he got an Oscar nomination for that.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
And rightly so.
Those
are the only ones that I can whack in support.
Okay. Well, I had Jeff Goldblum, obviously. Okay. It's just for all the reasons we've said and more besides. God creates dinosaurs. God destroys dinosaurs. God creates man. Man destroys God. Anyway, so Jeff Goldblum. I have gone for the fun performances here, so I'm not going Ben Kingsley. I'm not going Ralph Fiennes. Right. Unless you want to talk about like the 5 most despicable things Ralph Fiennes does in Schindler's List. No? Should we move on? Let's move on. So I've got Jeff Goldblum, number 1. Then I have got Mike Feist in West Side Story.
Oh, great. Yeah, good shout.
Because he should have been nominated for and won the Oscar that year. I thought Riff was never a particularly interesting character to me in West Side Story. I was always like, when I sat down to watch it, I was like, oh, it'll be Bernardo. Bernardo will be the best. And Mike Feist, just this sort of washed out, malnourished little troublemaker, and he was so good in it, and I think he's increasingly and rapidly becoming one of the most interesting performers of his generation, and I just thought he was brilliant in reinventing that character in West Side Story.
The reason why I would agree with you is because Daniel Kaluuya won that year for
which is a lead performance.
It's a lead performance, so that makes no sense. So yes.
No, they're different years. Was
Daniel
Kaluuya won the Nomadland year.
Right, okay, so it would have been in
2021, which is the junior Troy Kotzer won for Coda.
In which case then, obviously.
I don't think Coda should have been anywhere near the Oscars. Perfectly pleasant film.
Yeah, but not.
But yeah.
No.
So Mike Feist, Jeff Goldblum, and then I genuinely couldn't decide between these 3 in any order. But if I had to do it third, I will go Christopher Walken in Catch Me If You Can.
Yeah. Great show.
I mean, I could listen to him talk about the mouse churning the milk into cream and in the way that only Christopher Walken can. That scene where he's like, I bought you a Cadillac. It's like, you bought me a Cadillac. And then Leonardo DiCaprio walks out. I was like, where are you going? And he just keeps shouting after him, where are you going tonight? Because he knows it's just pack of bullshit.
Yeah.
He's so good. I mean, Christopher Walken's good in everything.
Yeah. Apart from Dune 2.
Yeah. Okay. Nominated again for Catch Me If You Can, and didn't win, but okay. Second place. This is the impossibility now. I'm gonna go Connery in Indiana Jones.
It's so much fun, isn't it?
I've already quoted one of his. I won't go on any more than that. We named the dog Indiana. The dog. Yeah, I'm here to save you, and who's going to come to rescue you, Junior? Anyway, and the bit where they both realise they both slept with Elsa or whatever. It's like, yeah, she talks in her sleep. Number one, with a bullet. No, it's not Schindler's List. Is Robert Shaw in Jaws? It's a supporting performance.
No, it is a supporting performance.
I rewatch Jaws way more often than I should, and I always forget how little he has that little scene to foreground at the beginning, where he's like scraping his fingernails down the board, and he's like, "Big fish, I'll find him for 3, but I'll catch him and kill him for 10." And then you don't see him again for about half an hour.
Yeah.
And then the last 40 minutes of the movie, and for the USS Indianapolis speech alone, which I think is still, for me, the most single rewatchable scene in any Spielberg movie, is the 3 of them around that table. It goes from hilarious, like they're all trading these wounds, and Roy Scheider can't decide, like, should I show them my appendix scar? Because their wounds are all like, this was a shark, this was an eel, this was because they're men of the water. And then it all starts to descend into farce, because then Robert Shaw like puts his arm out and says, "See that arm? I can't extend that muscle because of an arm wrestling injury." And then Richard Dreyfuss has the famous line where he just opens his t-shirt and says, "Look, right here, this is my scar." He points to his heart. And it's like, "I don't see anything." And he just says, "Mary Ellen Moffat, she broke my heart." And then Quint pivots into this USS Indianapolis speech, which apparently Robert Shaw claims he kind of half wrote himself. Did it one day and was so drunk that he just couldn't do it, because he was constantly drunk on set. And came back the next morning slightly sobered up and just said to Spielberg, "Roll the camera, we'll do it in one take." And apparently got it in that one take. So Quint, to me, one of the all-time great movie characters, is my number one.
Yeah, that's a good shout.
And we didn't even mention Ke Huy Quan.
No.
We didn't mention... we did mention Paul Dano earlier.
Well, I was remiss of me. I'm going to put him in my list for supporting, because he should be there.
Malkovich in Empire of the Sun. There's a lot. It's the men. It's an embarrassment of riches for the men. Some of the supporting guys in Saving Private Ryan as well. I think Jeremy Davis, who plays the corporal, who's he's not really a soldier, is he? He's a translator or something like that. But anyway.
Okay, well then,
the lead actor.
On to the leading one then. I do have Tom Hanks in Bridge of Spies again, because that's difficult dialogue, and he makes it sound completely convincing the whole way through. All that stuff about having a cold as well is like, it's really, really engaging, and it's not Tom Hanks's loudest, like, most kind of overt Spielberg performance, but it's my favourite. And because Saving Private Ryan obviously does that thing of dropping off after the first half an hour. I just love that he's sort of he's panicked, but he's not. Like, he's so uptight, he's so clenched in Bridge of Spies. He starts off quite calm when he thinks he's going to be able to deal with everything, and over time as things goes on, and he suddenly realises that this is going to take more and more negotiation, he clenches up, and it's a really subtle change, and I really, really like watching that. But I worry for the rest of okay, I'll do the obvious ones first, and then I'll do a slightly less obvious one first. So Ralph Fiennes, because I know that's technically a supporting performance, but it has just as much impact in the film as anything else.
Okay, I never mind category fraud when someone's going from supporting to lead. It's when it the other way. Yeah.
Because you're right, that film is a three-piece realistically with Liam Neeson and Ben Kingsley and Ralph Fiennes. But the fact that survivors who watched that film said that he terrified them back into thinking that he was back is a testament to what being evil in a film is all, and like it's all the physical stuff as well. It's the stretching the shotgun over the shoulders and all that sort of stuff, and it's all horrible things to watch. But he is so incredibly good, and it's strange to me that neither this nor The English Patient got him an Oscar, to be honest.
Well, it's all just the Oscars doing their thing. Tommy Lee Jones was due for Tommy Lee Jones beat Ralph Fiennes.
Yes.
for his performance in The Fugitive, which is a fantastic performance. But this is where it's just, I don't know how you compare those two performances or those two films.
Yeah.
It's they're both excellent at what they are, but what they are is so fundamentally different.
Yeah.
And yeah, The English Patient, that was Geoffrey Rush in Shine. I mean, I never understood what the big deal about Shine was in 1996.
Sure.
It's so dull. Has anyone ever rewatched that film since then? No.
I've never felt the urge to watch it the first time around. To be honest with you.
You're better off.
Yes. Okay, I'll do the other two quickly.
Okay.
I think Leonardo DiCaprio's best performance of his career is in Catch Me If You Can.
Yeah, I got him in my 5.
Good.
Yeah.
It goes everywhere, and what's great is that there is this kind of bravado, but then when you realise that he doesn't know, he's losing control, and actually this is catching up with him. He starts to unfold, and I really love watching it. I think every little decision he makes is great. The supply teacher scene is one of my favourite bits. It's not Abignale, Abignale. So great, just commands attention from minute one. And I think I really like Leo DiCaprio's performances. I think he's a strange man, but he's always pretty good at acting, and he's only going to do your film if he's able to do an acting and and be a proper character. And this is about as characters get. I did an episode of this podcast at Christmas where me and some friends, we talked about our top 5 film characters, and that's in my list because it's this kind of roam everywhere, but clinging on to confidence for dear life character, which is just brilliant. And then the other one I have is Gabriel LaBelle in Fabelmans, which I don't think got nearly enough love. I think that's a hard job. I think that's the scene at the at the dance at the end where he shows him the film that he made and everyone's watching it, and then he goes out his bully, talks to him in the corridor and stuff. That was so beautifully done. Like as someone who's done like little bits of film acting, looking at that and going, how the hell you must have had to prepare so hard for that, because I think every single little jot and tittle of this is like you could ham it up, you could blow random bits of it up for no reason, but it's all kept at this really good level, and I just believed him the whole time. I was seeing the entire film through his eyes, and at no point did I have that thing of going, oh, stupid kid, you don't get it. Mm-hmm. And the whole time I went, yeah, I totally understand why you're feeling this way. And much of that came purely from his performance. And watching someone falling in love with a film like that in front of you is a joy to watch.
It really is. I don't have him in my 5, right. But when you put it like that, it's making me wonder whether or not I should. Is that, if you don't, you haven't 5?
I haven't. No, I haven't. But I've not got any more.
So. Oh, okay. So the thing, as I said, I have Leonardo DiCaprio, and then actually just picking up on the Gabriel LaBelle thing, because what I wanted to have in here was something that symbolises or represents the kind of the young people that are so often at the centre. Now, okay, he's not a kid in that film in the same sense that some other Spielberg characters are. So I was sort of torn between Christian Bale and Empire of the Sun,
right,
where you can see, or even though it's a slightly unvarnished child performance or youth performance at least, you can start to see all of those things that we now know Christian Bale is capable of and can do, or Henry Thomas in E.T. And but now you put Gabriel LaBelle in the mix, but I think I'm just going with Henry Thomas in E.T. because again, it's one of my favourite movies. I've rewatched it this week and I forgot. Why I haven't watched that in 10 years is beyond me, but certainly when I was younger it was one of my favourite movies, and it does not work without him in this role. And there's so much stuff on YouTube about the you can just find the audition, the rehearsals, the way Spielberg's interacting with him to sort of draw these emotions out from him. It's one of the best child performances I think I've ever seen on film. And again, he's in almost every frame. It's also one of the best drunk acting scenes I've ever seen in my life. I mean, as someone who I presume never had been drunk at that age, because he's like 9 or something, he plays a very compelling drunk person. I love that scene where he sets the frogs, he sets the frogs free. Go, run, get free. So I got Henry Thomas, Leonardo DiCaprio. Then I will go from most predictable maybe to least. Most predictable, I do have Harrison Ford, because I am a big Harrison Ford fan, or I was certainly up until the mid-90s.
Right.
And I have it for Raiders, because I just think it's such an iconic film performance. It's this perfect balance of this sort of bookish professor, but also this sort of action star, but he's not over the top, infallible. He looks good, but he doesn't look ridiculously good. There are scenes in this movie where he's just clearly tired, he's bruised, he's sore, he's sweaty. It's just a really authentic performance of what I imagine most archaeologists are like. I should go hang out in the archaeology department at the university more often. Maybe I'll find my circa 1981 Harrison Ford. So I do have Harrison Ford in because it's just iconic. Number 2, this isn't ranked. I'm just going in terms of, most to least predictable. Tom Cruise.
In Minority Report?
No. In War of the Worlds.
War of the Worlds.
Which we have not mentioned. Another remake. So Spielberg's always done 3 remakes, and that's the second one he did, I think. And the reason why is, again, I'm a big Tom Cruise fan. I think this is a period of Tom Cruise's career where it's just about to go off the rails. And this was a period where he was incredibly interesting. He was doing the thing that Leonardo DiCaprio has mastered, which is, I'm going to pick the best directors in the world and I'm going to work with them. I'm going to work with Stanley Kubrick. I'm going to work with Paul Thomas Anderson, with Steven Spielberg, with Cameron Crowe. And then obviously we know what happened on that couch with Oprah and what's happened since. And I think the thing about War of the Worlds is, the reason why I picked it is because it's such a non-Tom Cruise performance. He's this sort of washed out, failed dad. Doesn't have enough food in his fridge. He's kind of pathetic when you meet him at the beginning. And yeah, sure, it's a Tom Cruise performance. So eventually, he kind of becomes a slightly more heroic, but not heroic figure. He just learns how to protect his daughter. Not even his son, because his son runs off over the hill and implausibly shows up again in the final scene. So I've spoiled that one now too. And I just think it's a very unusual Tom Cruise performance. That kind of, I can run, I can survive, I can do things that you couldn't possibly think a human could do, are all there. But there is also this sort of helplessness around the performance, I just think he's really, I think he's really good in it. And I do like that movie. We didn't really mention it yet.
No.
And my number 1, again, not ranked, but is to go all the way back to the beginning. You don't tell me it doesn't count because it's a TV movie. Dennis Weaver. Dennis Weaver, who is the star of Jewel.
Okay.
And again, he has to do all of this with his eyes and with a voiceover track because he doesn't really interact with anybody else in the movie because he's just being chased by a truck, the driver of whom you never encounter. And the character is so wet. There's a scene quite early on in the movie where he stops somewhere to refill his car and he calls his wife, and his wife is like, this man was harassing me at that party 2 nights ago and you didn't do anything, and you're like, you're not a man, and you're, terrible. And she's berating him down the phone, and he's so wet in his response, and you kind of, that's like in the first 10-15 minutes of the movie. And then his initial response to being chased by the truck again is sort of so cautious and this sort of just very wet salesman. He just looks like, his glasses and his tie. And then slowly but surely he doesn't become a hero because it's not that kind of movie, but slowly and surely just builds up some resolve to try and solve this problem. And he has to do it with very minimal dialogue, and he has to do most of it with just facial expressions. It's a great performance, and it's another way to just say, go watch Jewel if you haven't seen it, because it's a really good film.
Okay. I'm conscious of time.
Yes.
So, I wanted to say that I think that his best written film is either Jaws or Bridge of Spies.
Oh yeah, we can just do script easy. Yeah,
I think
we can knock that off quickly. It's Jaws.
Yeah, I mean it probably it probably is. Like it probably is, but
it's most quotable.
It's definitely the most quotable. And looking at the time, we are going to need a bigger boat. So I mean that's kind of that feels slightly like a non-negotiable, but. Yeah.
Well,
there is clever stuff in lots of other things. Like Jurassic Park has a lot of clever stuff under the hood of it, which I really like in the writing.
I mean, crafting a compelling narrative out of Schindler's Ark was a damn difficult job for Steve Zalian, but I think, is that the only Spielberg movie that ever won the Oscar for screenplay? Schindler's List, I think it is.
Yes, would be my guess.
I think it is. Yeah. So maybe that.
Yeah.
You would think Lincoln would have, but it didn't. You would just think it would. It's full of dialogue. It's Tony Kushner. I don't know what won that year. I want to say Argo. One screenplay that year. It's adapted from a magazine article. But anyway.
Okay. So we have the 2 categories of best film and best directorial accomplishment.
We did.
I'm sort of taking your lead on this. I think his best directorial accomplishment is either Jaws, Jurassic Park or Schindler's List. But I shout out The Fabelmans because I think it's, despite the fact that it could be the most indulgent thing on the planet, it feels really mature. And I think that is testament to what a genius he is. Yeah, Saving Private Ryan, the first half an hour is extraordinary, it's great. I really like Munich because of how cold it is and it's sort of morally ambiguous and dials down the sentiment and focuses purely on the thriller. And that's a clever way to do it. But those other three are just kind of, they feel above the rest of them, filmmaking wise, for me. Jaws, Jurassic Park, Schindler's List.
Yeah, I mean, I have Jaws and Schindler's List, and I have The Fabelmans on that list. I don't know what it is about Jurassic Park. I didn't really put it in a lot of these lists, and maybe that's just a complete and total oversight.
Did you enjoy dinosaurs as a child?
I never really had a huge dinosaur stage. No.
Because I was that's what it is? Fucking all over it as a kind I would be able to tell you random facts about random dinosaurs for ages. I was one of those kids.
One of those kids. Okay. Well, my nephew's a bit like that at the moment.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Maybe he should watch Jurassic Park.
He should.
Yeah. Directorial achievement. Yeah. Yes. Schindler's List for all of the reasons that we've said that we don't need to go back over again. Jaws for creating a type of movie and for the problem solving that was required to do it, and yet still. It hasn't aged. To me, it hasn't aged. It stands up. Yeah. Even though the shark, is obviously not a real shark, and it doesn't matter. And The Fabelmans for, again, yes, that kind of maturity. And then I actually have some of the more darker films rounding out my director's list because, I don't know, I find them, sort of the style that he's bringing to bear on them just a little bit more interesting. And I think that partnership with Kaminsky is that real maturing of him as a filmmaker. So I actually have Minority Report in the 5 for directing. Right. And I have AI in the 5 for directing, which are kind of basically from the same year. So that they would be my 5. But then on the best film side, I've lent into the more, these are the ones I really just love space. So I do not have, spoiler alert, Schindler's List in the best film. I always find it very difficult to talk about Schindler's List in that context. Talking about individual performances or individual aspects of the technical, the production design, the values, but actually sort of saying anything which gets into the space of I really enjoyed this film because I don't enjoy this film.
Sure,
it's a fucking ordeal every time to watch, as it should be. Yeah.
The only reason I wouldn't put AI in directorial achievement is because I think a lot of it is still a Kubrick film. And it's not the fact I think it's this purist view of like, oh, it's a Kubrick film, why did he make it? Because I think it's better that Steven Spielberg made it, but I just think that like a lot of the groundwork was kind of already, and I know they were collaborating on it sort of for a while, but a lot of the groundwork was there. But yes.
That's why I like it though, it's that partnership, because Spielberg's spoken so much about how 2001, amongst other movies, was such a big influence on him. And indeed, Close Encounters has got such a 2001 vibe, and its ponderousness, and it's what, and I kind of love those two things coming together a little bit in AI, but it's a fair point, You could hold Marx back for it not being totally his own work. Fair.
Well, I only have 2 competing for the best film, which is nuts considering how many bloody films this man has made. I think his best film is Jaws.
Well, then we can just stop because it is. You're right.
Okay. But my favourite is Catch Me If You Can. I think it's absolutely perfect. I don't think it puts a foot wrong for the whole time. That really like we mentioned before, the finger tapping score. I love the performances. The dialogue's really funny. All the characters are well drawn. It's this kind of, you never get off it. Like it sort of carries you with it it's like getting on a lazy river or something. You just sort of go with it wherever it takes you. And it snaps by really fast. It doesn't feel like 2 hours or whatever it is. That's probably my favourite. But you can't make a better film than Jaws, can you? Really?
I don't think you can. No, right. It's the one it's the one I would take. You know, that stupid question, right? Is if you could take one movie to a desert island, it's Jaws. Yeah. It's the movie. I mean, I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty sure it's the movie I have seen the most times in my life. If it ever is lost to time, I could have a pretty good stab off from memory of writing the script. If we lost the script in the movie for some reason. It ushered in a new type of movie. 1975 was like very brief aside. Maybe the greatest. Do you know what the 5 Best Picture nominees in 1975 were?
No, go on.
Jaws. Barry Lyndon.
Oh, good.
Dog Day Afternoon.
Right.
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which won.
Right.
And Nashville.
Oh, so it was Nashville. Oh, right.
So it's Altman, Spielberg, Kubrick, Sidney Lumet, and whoever I've forgotten. Someone else.
Pretty good.
And Spielberg wasn't nominated for director. Fellini was nominated instead. Anyway, so Jaws, yes. Catch Me If You Can is in my 5, so we
Okay.
do have similar to... So the ones I dropped out from director as opposed to film were the heavier, darker ones. Schindler's List, Minority Report, AI.
Yeah.
And what I've put in instead of them here, I've kept... I'm keeping Jaws. Well, I've got Jaws. Catch Me If You Can. E.T.
Yep.
What's wrong with you with E.T.? Why isn't E.T. in your
I love
five?
it. I love it.
I'm just
But, like, it's, you know,
I'm just
it's not as good as Jaws.
No, it's not. It's not. And I do have Raiders. I do have Raiders in there. So I'm
Sure.
skewing very, very early on the sort of the films that I would describe as my favourites of his.
Yeah.
But that just makes sense because it's you come across these movies first as a kid, and if the first 4 movies you see by a filmmaker are Jaws, E.T., Raiders,
Yeah.
and Close Encounters of the Third Kind,
Yeah.
then you're gonna love those movies for the rest of
Absolutely.
your life, and there's just no way. There's no way around that, really. Yeah.
Well, there's a reason they've stuck around for so long.
Exactly.
It's just because of how good they are the whole time.
But we both have Jaws. Interesting.
Well, it just sort of feels undisputable to me.
Yeah,
But-
it's not controversial, is it? It's not.
No,
a
it isn't
controversial
remotely.
choice.
Well, there we go.
And what's next? Is an untitled
For
science fiction film.
Spielberg, is it?
That might be just to close things out.
Spielberg next
He's making an
film.
untitled science fiction film with Emily Blunt, Josh O'Connor, Coleman Domingo, Colin Firth.
How bizarre.
And there's no particular information yet about plot, but its release date is penciled in for May 2026.
Yeah.
So
I've
basically
also
a year. away.
seemingly got an adaptation of Hamnet, which he's producing with
Yeah.
Chloe Zhao in charge of. But yeah, his next film is.
But and that's the other bit. And again, I know we have to wrap up because we've been
Yeah.
talking for ages. But that's the other bit of Spielberg that we didn't, and we're not going to now. But you know, when he starts to pivot into that dramatic space, Colour Purple and Empire of the Sun, what he also starts to do at that point is executive producing and producing
Yeah.
The Goonies,
Yeah.
Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Back to the Future. I mean, the man is just a force of nature. And I look forward to seeing that untitled science fiction film. Apparently he's going back to some of his early interests around space and aliens, and
Which has worked very well for him before.
yeah. All I know is that on Wikipedia it says that other people have been cast, unnamed actors, in the role of North Korean soldiers. So I'm kind of intrigued
Right.
now.
Okay.
I am kind of
That is-
intrigued now.
No, that is exciting, actually.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, Dan, we were never gonna not take up until the very final seconds and a
course
few
we weren't.
beyond. But thank you very much for doing that, because when you mentioned, I cobbled together notes yesterday in a bit of a panic because you were like, yes, Spielberg. And I was like, yes, I'd love to do Spielberg. But like, oh Christ, there's so much to do. But I'm really glad we did that. So thank you very much.
We'll leave it to everyone else to judge if it came across as panicked. I don't think it did.
No, I don't think so. I mean, there is sort of, you know, with Spielberg, you sort of have those. I mean, so many of those movies are just kind of stored away as favourites for whatever. You don't need to sort of do much work to bring them back to the fore.
Do you want a really wanky Spielberg close-in in one quote from The Fabelmans?
Of course I do.
Because I've been quoting or bastardizing lines from all sorts of movies all day. And just to close with the Michelle Williams quote, as they're going in to see the greatest show on earth, young Steven Spielberg, Sammy Fabelman. Movies are dreams that you never forget. When it's over, you're going to have the biggest smile on your face. That's Steven Spielberg when he's at his best.
Boom. Perfect. Right. Dan, thank you very much. I hope we catch you again soon.
Thanks.
So there you have it, a full and very thorough Spielberg chat. And even after 2 hours, we still could have said so much more. I wanted to very quickly talk to you and say thank you. 3 years ago, I was umming and ahhing about if a podcast was a good idea. And 3 years down the line, I know that my pathetic upload schedule has hindered success somewhat, but I am so glad to still be doing it. It turns out that running a podcast completely solo is a lot of work, like a lot of work. But it's fun work, like making the music for the pod or the new thumbnail and then writing and recording and editing each episode before publishing them all myself. It's fun work. And the reason I was inspired to keep doing it was because of the reception from you, the people who listen. This podcast means a lot to me, and it makes me very happy knowing that I can look back on this period of my life and listen to discussions I've had with some of my favourite people about my favourite films and remember what it was like to do them. What I've managed to do so far is curate a hell of a lot of talking about movies, but actually a proper scrapbook of some of my time at university and a shift in my filmic perspectives. And that's really quite cool. I've had so much fun doing this, and I'm not going to stop anytime soon. In fact, there may be, and it's a maybe, slightly more regular podcasting coming soon, because I really don't want to let this go. I love doing this, and the numbers I got from a Spotify Creators Wrap this year were really moving, and I was very happy indeed. And I'm hoping that just keeps growing. It's my pleasure to talk to you about films, and I look forward to keeping going. I'll stop being sappy now, because this was already a very long podcast, but I do really mean it when I say thank you for listening. It means the world. I'll catch you again soon. You can count on that. Bye!